Bomb Iran, bomb Iran.
Aid to the Contras.
Bomb Iran, bomb Iran.
Aid to the Contras.
Bomb Iran, you know, bomb. Anyway, that old Beach Boys song, Bomb Iran. Bomb. Anyway.
This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Is there a way that we can use these protests to benefit our geopolitical stance in the world?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand these protests are very different from the post-election protest in 2009, where many people believe Mahmoud Ahmadinejad won re-election by fraud. The protests back then were over who was going to run the regime. These protests about whether the regime survives or not, and that makes them much more threatening to the Ayatollahs, much more dangerous, and raises the stakes considerably. I think President Trump has already signaled a huge difference from the Obama administration by supporting the protesters, but I think we need to do more. We do not want to make the same mistake that America made before in 1956, calling opposition out in Hungary and standing by watching while Soviet tanks crushed the opposition. After defeating Saddam Hussein in 1991, we called for that regime to be overthrown and stood by where Saddam massacred other Iraqis.
Right.
So I think we do need to provide assistance. I think we can do it in several ways. Number one, this is yet another reason why the president should get out of the nuclear deal with Iran, should resume all of our previous sanctions, putting increased economic pressure on the regime. We should provide material, financial support to the opposition if they desire it. We should work with intelligence services from other countries, Saudi, Israel, to provide more pressure. There's a lot we can do, and we should do it. Our goal should be regime change in Iran.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
After years of grueling negotiations, Washington is threatening to sink the Iran nuclear deal. With the White House taking a more aggressive stance and Iran defiantly testing new ballistic missiles, is the thaw between the US and Iran over? Can the hard-fought nuclear agreement survive the spike in tensions? And should the Middle East brace itself for yet another war?
Professor, right after taking office, Trump's administration imposed new sanctions against Iran for ballistic missile tests and put it on notice for destabilizing behavior in the Middle East. Is American-Iranian detente over?
I don't believe so. I would not really judge Trump's Iran policy based on one sanctions they imposed on because of the missile issue. It is for 38 years continuously the U.S. in every administration, Republican or Democrat, they have sanctioned Iran, pressured Iran to isolate Iran.
Hello, I'm Dr. Bitchute, and I want to talk a little bit about Iran. I have been a serious critic of Obama and John Kerry. But one of the things that they have done that I thought was outstanding was the peace treaty with Iran. And the reason for that is very simple. For decades, and I've been involved with Iran for over 50 years, I've always wanted Iran to have a major position in the Middle East, as it has centuries ago when it was considered Persia. Iran is an old culture, one of the oldest cultures that we know. It's Persian, it's Zoroastrian, and it protects Jews, Christians, and Baha'is. I'm against war with Iran, and I'm particularly against the fact that Israel is trying to provoke a war to make sure that America is its ally against Iran. There is really no enemy in Iran. Let me speak a little bit about what I know about Iran and why Iran has always been the fall boy for our CIA. When Mossadegh was the prime minister of Iran in the 1950s, our CIA ordered Roosevelt and Schwarzkopf, the father of the Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf, to come in and overthrow Mossadegh at the insistence of Prime Minister Churchill. Churchill maintained that Mossadegh, who nationalized all the oil wells and the oil companies in Iran, threw out the British petroleum oil, Aramco, American oil, because they wanted to have their own oil company. Instead, we overthrew Mossadegh and we put in a very ineffectual, bombastic man by the name of the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran was nothing more than a figurehead for the CIA and really was the son of a stable boy who was placed in the 1930s by British intelligence. So Iran has always been in play among the following nations: Britain, Russia, and the United States, primarily for its oil and primarily for its geopolitical concerns. I got involved with Iran in the 1970s when the Iranians took over the hostages and I had to negotiate with Ayatollah Khomeini. I had a lot of respect for Ayatollah Khomeini. I knew who he was. I understood that he was concerned about the safety of our hostages, but at the same time, he wanted to make his presence known that the Islamic fundamentalists had taken over a corrupt regime. I then was ordered by Jimmy Carter to fly to Iran and meet with Khomeini personally. I resigned, I refused, I said that was an incompetent order, and I suggested that the Iran hostage siege would continue for weeks, if not months. I did not know it would continue for years. The truth of the matter was that our CIA station chief and eventually our ambassador Helms had created a problem in Iran and a problem in the United States. We had 400 Foreign Service officers, American CIA, and other operatives in Iran, of whom only 8 spoke Farsi. So from the very beginning, in the 1950s to the 1970s, we were really maladroit at being able to hand a Persian country which was not Arabic, and that's important to understand. Persia is a country which is not Arab and does not like the Arabs, and it has a history of fighting Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries alongside the United States and alongside Israel, alongside many other allies. What subsequently happened was that Israel began to get involved in Iran for the simple reason that in Iran there were over 100,000 Persian Jews. Now, they've been there for centuries. I witnessed them, I saw them, I was there with them in Isfahan, and I was very impressed how the Iranians take care of the Jews, of the Armenians, of the Catholics, and the Christians. No one was persecuted. In turn, the Israelis felt that they had to have strategic tension in the Middle East. And what they did at that time was to create the Iran-Iraq War. Alongside the neocons, and particularly Zalmay Khalilzad under Secretary of State George Shultz, we created the Iran-Iraq War. And working with Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, who was then criticizing Israel and condemning Israel as a Zionist state, the Israelis nevertheless went in alongside Khomeini, sold him $500 million worth of armaments, tanks, heavy equipment in return for $500 million worth of oils. So the fact the rhetoric was severe, the Israelis had no problem making money from that situation and creating an increased strategic tension with Iraq. And of course, who supported Iraq? We, the United States. So as the Israelis flew the Phantom planes in the air on behalf of the Iranians, we flew the Iraqi planes, and in effect, it was just a kabuki with no consequence. On the ground, however, there was a serious consequence. Because of the work of the neocon and Zalmay Khalilzad and other warmongers who'd never been at war, there were over 1 million people who were killed. When I went to Iran years ago, I was very saddened to see how the killing field really existed as a result of American intervention, Israeli manipulation, and Iranian gusto. Now, what happened subsequently to that? The Israelis came back and started to supply Iran with oil, agricultural supplies, and started to build up Iran even in 2005, 2006. All along, they would create this notion that Iran, along with Hamas, who was really created in 1988 when I was on the West Bank, that's correct, Hamas was created by Israel as a counterforce to Hezbollah, which was Shiite and represented Iran's interest in the Middle East. The Israelis created Hamas in order to create a strategic tension and a constant state of tension where the Israelis could be in battle form and have armaments to use, to ship, and to deliver overseas. So Israel was not this disingenuous little actor who, was looking for peace all over the world. All the time, Israel was playing behind our back, and at the same time using our relationship with Iran as a focal point to make sure that we were always invested in the Middle East, when in fact we had very little national security interest in the Middle East other than oil. But the oil came primarily from Saudi Arabia, it came from Dubai, Qatar, other areas. Rex Tillerson knows this far better than I do. And in order to stop all of this, the Israelis went on and started to provide the Egyptians or the Chinese with missile systems. And the missile systems were then sold to Syria and then sold to Iran. So Israel claimed that the Iranians had missile systems, which of course I knew from having uncovered their track and trail as Australian operatives. These were Mossad operatives who went into China. I said, these are missile systems that you sold to Iran, and then you had counter forces to it. In effect, what Israel has done has become a very poor partner for the United States. It's one of the few countries that actually has killed Americans. In the 1960s, it was Israel that attacked the Liberty ship, knowing fully well it was an intelligence ship right off the borders of Egypt during the Sinai War, and it killed over 37 of our brave military officers and wounded over 131. They knew very well that this was an intelligence ship. They were not marked. They came in as a false flag, and they claimed that they had made a mistake. Well, that mistake was repeated once again on 9/11, when we had Mossad operatives who went into the Twin Towers, blew up both the Twin Towers, and 3 towers came down. So Israel was in a constant state of war, in a constant state of exacerbation of Middle East problems, so that the United States would stand by Israel in order to salvage it. Israel has always maintained that it could attack Iran, its nuclear positions, without any problem. That's a false, that's a complete lie. Israel is totally incapable of attacking the underground nuclear power plants in Iran. It can do no damage, and it's not able to refuel. So what happened in return? In return, we had President Trump, who promised us that there would be peace and no more wars. Well, that went by the wayside. Instead, he sent an Orthodox Jew, Jared Kushner, to Israel to deal with other Jews who had no experience in the Middle East, to negotiate somewhat of a peace treaty with the Palestinians, and in the same time try to find peace with Iran.
These are the latest pictures of damage in Gaza City after a series of Israeli airstrikes. At least 2 men were killed in the attacks. Israeli aerial bombardment was in retaliation for several rockets fired into its territory. Our Middle East correspondent Derek Stoffel is tracking this story for us, and he joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Derek, what more can you tell us about this retaliation carried out by Israel?
Well, John, Israel's military, the Air Force, carried out strikes against 4 targets early this morning in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The military says all of the targets belong to Hamas and included a military weapons storage depot and what they're calling a military compound in the area around Bet Lahia. Now, we do also know that a number of houses in the area in that neighborhood had suffered damage as well, and people had to flee those homes. Now, this came in response to the fact that there were 3 rockets fired yesterday from Gaza into Israel. Well, not all of them made it into Israel. One of the rockets fell short, landed in the Gaza Strip. A second projectile was shot down by the Israeli missile defense system. And the third did manage to hit Israeli territory. We believe it hit a road near the Israeli city of Sderot, which is very close to the Gaza border. Now, as for the strikes launched by the Israeli military, they left 2 men dead. And according to Palestinian officials, those 2 men belong to the armed wing of Hamas, and we do know that funerals were held today for those 2 men in the Gaza Strip.
Of course, Derek, all of this coming amid the anger over Washington's move, as we've been reporting all week, to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Further violence, though, in the other Palestinian territory, the West Bank. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. In Bethlehem and in Ramallah today, we have seen more clashes between mainly young Palestinian men who have been throwing rocks and in some cases Molotov cocktails at the Israeli security forces. They've been responding with tear gas and rubber bullets. Also, we're being told in some cases live fire. At the same time, we do know that there are some minor clashes here in Jerusalem today as well, with protesters facing off against security forces. In Jerusalem, they've been using officers on horses to try to push the crowds back. Now, this all sort of follows this days of rage that were called for by several Palestinian factions in response to the Trump declaration on Wednesday. Hamas actually went one step further and was calling for an intifada against Israel, but at this point, it doesn't seem like, the Palestinians have answered that call. We're seeing a different tact from the rival of Hamas. That's the Fatah party of the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. They're taking more of a diplomatic approach, turning to the United Nations. They were pushing for the Security Council meeting that we saw yesterday, and then later Palestinian officials will take their case to Cairo, where there is an emergency meeting of the Arab League that gets set to start a little bit later on today.
Our policy towards Iran is to push back on this hegemony, contain their ability to develop, obviously, nuclear weapons, and to work towards support of those elements inside of Iran that would lead to a peaceful transition of that government. Those elements are there, certainly, as we know.
Now they're well into the second stage. And by next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
pharaohs of ancient Egypt who built their empire with the help of a grand vizier, Queen Elizabeth II also has a grand vizier who serves as her most trusted advisor. His name is Lord Evelyn Rothschild, and he is the second wealthiest and most powerful person on earth. He is also Lord of the world's financial capital, the city-state of London. Lord Rothschild and his ring of power hide their identities behind 13 city council members who stand in as their representatives. On November 30th, 2000, Lord Rothschild, now in his 70s, got married in London to a wealthy Zionist businesswoman named Lynn Forrester. The couple then jetted to Washington and spent their wedding night in the White House. Just months before 9/11, they moved to New York and settled into their 18th floor luxury palace at River House, where two private terrorists offered them front row seats for the scheduled 9/11 show.
It was said that some 3,000 people were killed on September 11, for which we are all very saddened. Yet, up until now, in Afghanistan and Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions wounded and displaced, and the conflict is still going on and expanding. In identifying those responsible behind the September 11 attacks, there were three viewpoints. First, that a very powerful and complex terrorist group able to successfully cross all layers of the American intelligence and security carried out the attack. This is the prevalent viewpoint, which has been supported mainly and advocated by American statesmen. Second, that some segments within the U.S. government orchestrated the attack to reverse the declining American economy and its grips on the Middle East in order to save the Zionist regime. The majority of the American people, as well as most nations and politicians around the world, agree with this view.
Iran has been targeted and demonized by the City of London, that would be the Rothschilds, since the 1950s for nationalizing their oil. Iran is one of only 3 countries left on the planet that does not have a Rothschild-owned central bank. One other reason for the targeting of Iran is that Iran sits in the middle of the new Chinese Silk Road. Iran, while the geostrategic location for the Silk Road, it also poses a threat in a time of conflict of sealing off the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. We can also attribute a good portion of the reason for this genocide on Yemen because of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into the Red Sea, another vital choke point for the shipping trade.
Aloha. Well, I've made it to my birth nation of the United States once again, and as per usual, when I arrive here, I'm treated as a terror suspect by order of Israel, of course, who has declared me to be a, quote, operative of the Hamas terrorist organization, which I take as a great compliment coming from the Jewish supremacist state of Israel. Of course, they are in charge of America. The enemy is well inside the gate, and the stooges who run America also give orders to these minions on the ground who are given the order to harass me and treat me as a terror suspect. Now, one thing that I need to say, I think it's really quite relevant, is that over the years it's become increasingly clear to me, and literally has been said to me on this last journey into America, that those who are interrogating me, which includes Customs and Border agents and FBI and others, is that they, off the record, respect what I'm doing and acknowledge, indeed, the Jewish control of American politics and ultimately its use of the American military for Israeli wars. This has been acknowledged, again, off the record, and in fact there's a great deal of respect for me that I am saying this publicly, because of course they can't possibly say these things. There's also a genuine, seemingly, respect for me in that I don't hate America, and I don't hate America. I want what's best for America. But we did, those of us who served in the military, put our hand up under oath and swore to uphold the U.S. Constitution. How can we believe we're honoring that when the country's clearly been hijacked and we're not serving American interests? And ultimately, we know, deep down, all of us, what we need to do. So the question is, when are we going to do it? And of course, In my opinion, one of the greatest things that could possibly be done is a military coup. In fact, the real patriots within the U.S. military should be arresting these traitors in the U.S. Congress and reinstituting constitutional law and making null and void every law which is contrary to the U.S. Constitution, starting with the Patriot Acts 1 and 2 and NDAA successively. Now, I'm bringing back this video which I produced a couple years ago about Iran because it's very clear that the plans for Syria have not quite worked out as they had wanted. Of course, Syria is damaged badly and fractured from these Israeli wars that fit perfectly in line with Ehud Barak's strategy for Israel in the 1980s to effectively balkanize the surrounding Arab states and get them to bleed each other. They have achieved a lot of that, but they have not succeeded in using Syria as a stepping stone towards the real target and ultimately towards the World War III agenda. And the stepping stone of Syria was towards Iran. What we see, though, is with Syria not working according to plan, is that the crosshairs are being firmly fixed back onto Iran, and so many lies are being perpetuated again. Now, this is not about loving or hating Iran. This is about the truth. And Iran, quite frankly, if you actually studied it, you'd find has a lot to be proud of. Unlike the United States, which is nothing but a pack of lies, one lie built on another, Iran has so many truths that it doesn't have to embellish and can be very proud of, such as a very peaceful history, such as providing sanctuary to Christians and Jews over the centuries, such as standing up to the monster, to the empire, and doing so without flinching, refusing to bow. These are qualities that every self-respecting man or woman would appreciate. So Iran has much to be proud of, but Iran is very much in the crosshairs because although militarily it poses no real threat to us, it does pose a massive ideological threat. Again, it refuses to bow. And of course, what do we do when we go and fight Israeli wars? We bow to the Jewish supremacist, Talmudic, satanic, pedophile, bankster cult that is the Israeli power structure which runs America. So, we as Americans are going to be used for another war for Israel if we allow it. American sons and daughters are going to be sacrificed yet again. 22 American service members already committing suicide because of the Israeli wars they have fought. So I bring back this video, which wasn't really seen too much on the internet, because the issue of Iran is every bit as much pertinent today as it was 2 years ago. In fact, everything I said in this video 2 years ago is even more applicable today, given that Iran becomes that primary target once again. And I'll start it off with just a couple of clips showing Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is continuing the legacy of embarrassingly, slovenly, sycophantic, servile behavior towards Israel, going and kissing ass to the Jews at the Western Wall with his yarmulke on his head, going to Saudi Arabia and prostrating himself to the head choppers galore who provide the finance for ISIS and Al-Qaeda before it, the head choppers who continuously insult American intelligence by allowing us to allow our commander-in-chief to sell $350 billion worth of weapons, which will be in the hands of the head choppers, which will be used to kill American service members. Make no mistake about that. As far as I'm concerned, what Donald Trump has just done is absolute treason, knowingly providing weapons to the head choppers who provide the means financially, ideologically for ISIS, Israeli secret intelligence services. So, let's look at this video once again. Please share it far and wide. And let us not allow ourselves to be used as stooges for Jewish supremacists any longer.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know."
While American audiences may laugh at the seeming folly of how decisions to go to war are made, the end result has been incalculable suffering and death for millions upon millions in the decimation of Iraq. I wonder how much laughing there will be when the American people fully comprehend that the invasion and occupation of Iraq was from beginning to end an unlawful war of aggression based on fraud for the expansionist agenda of the Greater Israel Project. In other words, Americans have been used as cannon fodder by a treasonous, bought and paid for U.S. Congress and White House. Even worse, this story of sacrificing American sons and daughters on the altar of worship of the Jewish state of Israel marches on.
It's an objective assessment that no one will have the courage to speak about. They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. Wolfowitz, as Undersecretary of Defense, manipulated President Bush #2 back into Iraq. They pushed definitely to try and get Bush before he left to move into Iran. We're conducting an expansionist policy of Israel, and everybody's afraid to say it.
So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So it has to pull in the Americans to do the work, to do the job, because they can't do it themselves. They have to demonize Iran so that America will do the bombing and the American soldiers and Marines will go and die and not the Israelis, because they know they can't do anything about Iran. Israel, if you look at it strategically, is a small state, very small population. Yes, it has nuclear weapons. It has, the threat of using nuclear weapons, but it cannot last in a war with Iran, and they know it. And this is why they demonize Iran, and they want the Americans and the Europeans to do, to take care of Iran for them.
But I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars, and if you open your mouth, you get targeted.
I know Donald Trump. I know him very well. And I think his attitude, his support for Israel is clear. He feels very warmly about the Jewish state, about the Jewish people, and about Jewish people. There's no question about it.
Iran funds arms and trains terrorists, militias, and other extremist groups that spread destruction and chaos across the region.
For decades, Western leaders have claimed that the Islamic Republic of Iran poses an existential threat to the safety and security of the world by its alleged pursuit of nuclear weapons. Many claim further that Iran is religiously fanatical, anti-Jewish, and that ultimately it seeks to wipe the Jewish state of Israel off the map. To the contrary, Iranian leaders point to their peaceful history and have repeatedly declared that they have never and will never seek nuclear weapons because it is immoral and against God's will. Somebody is lying. In this edition of In Focus, we will expose not only who is lying, but the insane agenda behind the lies.
I've come here to Tehran in Iran, a place that we've heard so much about over the years. Now let us imagine that Iran is launching wars of aggression against its neighbors and killing civilians on a regular basis. Let us imagine further that Iran is provably committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide according to the Black's Law Dictionary definition of the word. Imagine even further that Iran has illegally acquired hundreds of nuclear weapons and that leaders within Iran have threatened to use those weapons against Europe and beyond if its existence were threatened. Now, if that were the case, we'd all be wise to consider Iran a legitimate threat to global security. The only problem is what I have just described as the criminal activity of the Jewish state of Israel, not the Islamic Republic of Iran. So why is it that Israel is treated as a peace-loving democratic nation in the Middle East, while the people of Iran are being collectively punished and continuously threatened with all-out war?
They were taken over by the U.S. in a coup d'etat in 1953. The puppet dictator, the Shah, was installed on the throne by the CIA. His torture chambers were built by the CIA. And finally, the Iranian people overthrew the Shah and achieved independence in 1979. So when you hear all the propaganda about Iran being a threat, that's really how it's a threat. It's a threat because it's a free and independent country. And if we allow a free and independent country to exist, here, especially here in the Middle East, the other nations might also want to be free and independent.
Iran is the ultimate stumbling block for what Israel wants to do in the Middle East, what I prefer to call Southwest Asia, which is a crucial part of Eurasia. Full spectrum dominance over this whole region, which implies balkanization of individual states. They have achieved that in Iraq, they are achieving that in Syria, they achieved that in Lebanon, Jordan doesn't count, and Iran is the ultimate stumbling block. So Iran must be demonized because it's against Israeli plans of regional domination.
Iran is a threat for the order of the world because Iran contests this order, and Iran is supporting a lot of countries and groups who are contesting this order. So I understand what Benjamin Netanyahu wants to say. He wants to say that Iran is a revolutionary country. That's true, yes.
We must have a peace in which territories adjacent to Israel are not used as launching grounds for rockets and missiles against the Jewish state. Secondly, we must make sure that the backer of these terrorists, Iran, doesn't have nuclear weapons and nuclear-tipped missiles. Today, we're the targets. But with the ICBMs that they're developing, London would be in range, Washington would be in range. In fact, the whole world could be in range.
Gareth Porter is a historian and author of the book Manufactured Crisis. Serious geopolitical analysts consider it to be an authoritative book on the subject of Iran's alleged nuclear weapons program.
So would it be accurate to say that the same people who provided us with the dodgy dossier and the other really fraudulent evidence to support the invasion and occupation of Iraq, is it the same people who provided that who are providing this so-called evidence for the Iranian nuclear crisis?
It's the same group of neoconservatives within the Bush administration, closely allied with Israel, of course, who were responsible for both. But different people were in charge of the details of the plan. In the case of Iraq, of course, it was Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith at the Pentagon.
This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control.
In the case of Iran, however, it was John Bolton at the State Department who had the primary responsibility for Iran policy. We know that he went on unauthorized trips to Israel. The first unauthorized trip in June of 2003, he met with the head of Mossad, and there was no record of what was said in the meeting because it was unauthorized. And that a few weeks later, Mossad created a new office, which we know from a journalistic account that was published later, had the function of putting information out to governments and news media about the Iranian nuclear program.
I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know.
The same people who forged the dodgy dossier claiming that there were WMD in Iraq, which was the excuse for that horrific war that killed over 1 million people, are doing the same thing with Iran. They actually plotted to implicate Iran in a nuclear program at exactly the same time, using the same people and the same techniques as the dodgy dossier on the Iraqi WMD. So it's another WMD scare, and it's just as bogus as the first one.
It was absolutely fraud. They weren't cherry picking. This was out and out fraudulent documentation.
Israel is now saying that they believe that Iran will have nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability by 2009. They believe that Iran will have nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability by 2009.
This story is very strange because it's continuing since years and years. There is no evidence at all of a military program. This country was inspected much more than any other country in the world. But they continue to say that this country will have a nuclear bomb next week, always next week, since years, next week.
Every month that goes by brings Iran closer to possessing a nuclear weapon.
But you've got to say that time is marching on, and so is their nuclear weapons program.
The world is united in support of our determination to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon.
Brought a diagram for you. Here's the diagram. Where should a red line be drawn? A red line should be drawn right here.
من تأکید می‌کنم که جمهوری اسلامی هرگز در پی تسلیحات هسته‌ای نیست. شعار ما انرژی هسته‌ای برای همه و سلاح هسته‌ای برای هیچ کس است. ما بر این هر دو سخن پای خواهیم فشرد.
Iran is one of the least aggressive countries in modern history. It's been continually attacked, invaded, and terrorized, and they've never attacked anybody for a very long time. So they're a classically defensive power.
If you are an ally, if you join our coalitions, if you're part of the international financial system, etc., you can get away with anything. But if you have a theological political system of government, if you had an Islamic revolution against our own interests in the Middle East and beyond, then you are an outcast, an outsider, a pariah, and you must be isolated, contained, and if everything fails, bombed.
My personal position on that is this: we ought to try every possible avenue we can to see if we can get them to correct their desire and goal of acquiring a nuclear weapon, but we cannot let them acquire that weapon. We are the only country in the world that can stop that. The Israelis, in my opinion, do not have the capability of stopping it. They can delay it. There will also be many, many side effects, all of them adverse, from an Israeli strike. But at the end of the day, if we don't get it done the way the administration's working on it now, which I totally agree with, then we ought to take them out.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, we're working hard. We're working hard.
This is America, bombing the world into democracy and freedom. And here we have Secretary of State Hillary Clinton cackling like a clinical psychopath with the prospect of instigating a war of aggression that would in all likelihood lead to World War III. Let us not forget that this woman is the odds-on favorite to become the next president of the United States. What we see within this matrix of power is a sickeningly servile mainstream media constantly allowing the lie that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons to go unchallenged and thus maintaining the illusion of Iran as a threat. Even worse, Charlie Rose actually begins laughing with Hillary Clinton and James Baker about the U.S. government's penchant for World War III.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, we're working hard. We're working hard.
In the following clip, we see a refreshingly rare example of an Israeli leader being called to task about the lie that Iran is planning to, quote, wipe Israel out.
This idea that Iran wants to wipe Israel out. Now, that's a common trope that is put about by a lot of people in Israel, a lot of people in the United States. But as we know, Ahmadinejad didn't say that he plans to exterminate Israel, nor did he say that Iran policy is to exterminate Israel.
Well, I happen to disagree with all due respect. You speak of Ahmadinejad.
Disagree with what?
I speak of Khamenei, Ahmadinejad, Rafsanjani, Shamkhani. I give the names of all these people. They all come basically ideologically, religiously. It's a statement that Israel is an unnatural creature. It will not survive. They didn't say we'll wipe it out, you're right, but it will not survive. It is a cancerous tumor, just to be removed. Was said just 2 weeks ago again.
Well, for one, I'm glad you've acknowledged that they didn't say they will wipe it out. Because
serious journalism, such as the previous interview, is vastly overshadowed by the far more typical example in the next interview, in which David Cameron is allowed to brush aside the grave threat Israel's hundreds of nuclear weapons pose to all people, and in typical mainstream media servility, the so-called journalist allows Cameron to bamboozle the viewer by diverting back to the fraudulent claim that Iran intends to wipe Israel out.
Why should Iran have to declare that and Israel not? There's still so much ambiguity about Israel's nuclear weapons in the first place.
As I said, everyone should apply the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think that is absolutely key. But I think there's a special case here with Iran, a country that is trying to get a nuclear weapon and that is saying that it believes in wiping another country off the map.
This is the story that's continued on until it's continuing right now. I mean, it's the same regiment of propaganda against Iran.
Senator Frank Church from Idaho, he held the Church hearings in the U.S. Senate because he had found out that there were CIA agents in all of the mainstream outlets throughout the United States. At the time, they had identified 300 agents, and it's probably even more than that. So the mainstream media in the United States is tightly controlled. It's a tightly controlled propaganda machine.
I happened to work with CBS News before the revolution occurred. I witnessed how the image of Iran changed in foreign news reports. I witnessed how Iran became a demonic target through the past 35 years. So yes, there's quite a difference between what the reality is in Iran and how it's portrayed for the Western eye.
I've been truly blessed to travel all around this beautiful planet of ours, and I've been to places that most people would never even think to go. And this is largely because the mainstream media portrays people in places like Iran and Palestine as evil, as hating the West, as wishing that we would all perish and die. This is absolutely untrue, and the fact is, in places like Palestine and Iran, you're going to find the most generous and hospitable people that you will ever meet. They say in America, you want to kill all of us. They're lying to us. So here I am standing in front of the Christian church. Directly across the street we've got the Zoroastrian temple. Down the street that way we've got the Jewish synagogue, and of course we've got mosques here as well. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all practiced together in a city of Tehran, 15 to 18 million people, and virtually no sectarian hatred and no sectarian violence. This is not the Iran that we're told about in the West. Very kind. Thank you. We share, we share. I don't eat meat, so we share. Thank you. Very kind.
I love your interviews. TV.
Oh, thank you.
Your...
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much. You know, the West is obviously presenting Iran as a real threat to...
Yes. We know.
So the television didn't have any effect on you. You know this is not...
Not at all.
Yeah. We don't even have a TV at home.
Yes, exactly.
Neither do we. Neither we do.
Yeah, but you know, we have some friends who were before in Iran, and also all of them said it's a beautiful country and the people are very, very friendly.
Ireland.
Ireland. Okay,
Ireland.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Mamnoon. Thank you. It's just, you know, this is the kind of thing that you see in Iran. It's just lovely people, genuine, real, and, you know, it's just so completely contrary to what we're told. It is really criminal the way that Iran and its people are misrepresented.
Indeed, a clash of civilizations is being cultivated by a morally bankrupt Western matrix of power that is willfully, intentionally, committing fraud against the people by justifying insane policies that support Israel at all costs. Understanding the fraud, it's time to introduce 5 amazing Iranians who shatter some of Western civilization's greatest lies. Nader Talibzadeh is a fiercely independent film director and producer who studied film at Columbia University in the United States. He has an audience of millions on his Iranian television program and is immensely respected in Iran and beyond. Siamak Mossadegh is Iranian, a doctor, a member of the Iranian parliament, and he also happens to be Jewish. Wait until you hear what he has to say. Bijan Nobavi is also a member of parliament, and he also happens to be a journalist who went to the front lines as a 16-year-old boy during the Iran-Iraq war, a purely defensive war in which 1 million Iranians lost their lives. Bijan is among 100,000 plus Iranians who were victims of Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons attacks that were directed and assisted by the CIA. To this day, he suffers respiratory problems from his exposure to chemical weapons. Dr. Sam Tarabi is one of the infamous Iranian mullahs. While mullah has largely become a derogatory term, all the term actually denotes is that one is an Islamic expert. Sam is an extremely thoughtful man who I connected with quite easily, as he also happens to have lived and, believe it or not, surfed in my home state of California. And lastly, we will meet Mansoura Karami, a gentle widow and mother whose husband was murdered for working on Iran's fictitious nuclear weapons program. Evidence all but proves his murder was carried out by agents of Israeli Mossad.
Why would the West be so, the imperial powers be so against Iran? Because of one thing. As soon as Imam Khomeini took power, from the very beginning few months, what happened is we had the Day of Quds, the last Friday of the month of Ramadan, the first Ramadan after the revolution, which was everybody's attention was focused upon Jerusalem. And that this is an occupied land, something has to be done about it. It's beyond, the PLO now. So it's the old focus of the entire Muslim world. And this thing has to be resolved. So the Day of Quds, the Day of Palestine, the Day of Jerusalem, started at the last Friday of the Ramadan of the first year the Islamic Revolution began, and a simple countdown began. And this ticking of the clock and this attention focused on Israel became paramount. And very quickly, the Zionist regime took the lead in a very strategic way to demonize Iran, and they've been doing it ever since. So that's the starting point. Iran has a history of being hospitable to Christians and Jews. Nebuchadnezzar tried to destroy the Jewish people. They took refuge with the Persian king. So the Jewish people know very well who we are.
It may be interesting for you. For example, 4 years ago, Israeli government says that I would pay $20,000 to each Iranian Jewish people who immigrated to Israel, but no one responds to this because we think that our identity is a historical identity. We are Iranian and we are Jew. And we are as much as Iranian as much as we are Jew. Few Iranian Jews go to Israel, they usually want to come back to Iran, or you want to go to USA or UK. Because the culture of the Israel, which is based on a part of a sort of racism, cannot be tolerated by Iranian Jews. I think that Zionism and anti-Semitism are sibling brothers. Because both of them says that Jewish people are different from other people. We do not need the manipulation of the Zionists because they only can disturb our condition. They would not improve our condition.
یا ما رو صلحجو تلقی نکنه. من فکر میکنم صلحجوترین ملت‌های دنیا ایرانی ها هستن و بسیاری از نقاط کشور ما در شمال و جنوب به تصرف دشمن در اومده. بخشی از قفقاز، آسیای میانه، اینها مربوط به ایران بوده و اینها رو در قراردادهای ظالمانه از کشور ما گرفتن. قرارداد ترکمنچای هستش که بخشی از خاک ایران رو روس‌ها بردن، مثل آذربایجان، مثل سایر کشورهای منطقه مرزی ما. و اینها همه نشون دهنده این است که ما همواره مورد حمله بودیم و هیچ وقت ما به هیچ کشوری حمله نکردیم. در اسناد سازمان ملل متحد یونایتد نیشن هم همینا هست و ایرانی ها به عنوان صلحجوترین کشورها مطرح بودن و ایرانی ها دارای یک تفکر و یک فرهنگی هستن که بیشتر به اصطلاح نفوذشون رو در دنیا از طریق فرهنگی یعنی نفوذ صلح‌طلبانه. تاریخ تمدن ایران نشون میده که ملت ایران ملت صلحجویی بوده. چه دلیل داره که ایرانی‌ها که انقدر صلح طلب بودن و همیشه همواره صلح رو به همه جای دنیا بردن، چه دلیلی داره بخوان ملتی باشن که امروز به غیر از این فکر کنن؟
Civilization is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. You know, civilization in the good sense of the word.
Or at least it can.
Right. Where it ends up increasing the ethical and the spiritual and the goodness in people. Where it allows them, gives them a space to grow spiritually and ethically, as opposed to just being a materialistic. I think this is the significant difference between Western civilization and what Iran is trying to do. Is we're trying to have that material welfare and that technological advancement, but maintain that spirituality and that ethical aspect of it as well, which is lost in the West, unfortunately. During the Iran-Iraq War, the Iraqis used chemical weapons on us. Everybody knows this. It's not, you know, propaganda. It's a fact. It's an established fact by Western medical authorities that Saddam, with the help of the Americans and certain European countries, used chemical weapons in the war. And we never retaliated, even though we had the ability to do that. But we didn't do it because of moral reasons. The reason why, the main reason why we don't have nuclear weapons is because it is immoral. That is actually the main reason why we don't have nuclear weapons. We have come to this conclusion, and this is reflected in the religious edict and in the religious guidance that we have from our scholars and at the head of that, the supreme leadership, a clear edict forbidding the use of nuclear weapons because it is a moral issue.
وقتی که آمریکا میاد یه تحریمی رو دیکته میکنه و بقیه اروپایی‌ها انجامش میدن، بالاخره دستای همشون یک جا هست و به هم دیگه کمک میکنن که سلطه داشته باشن. حالا من نمیدونم این سلطه به چه درد میخوره؟ مگه ما همه انسان نیستیم؟ چه فرقی میکنی با هم؟ توی دین ما سیاه و سفید نداریم، مسیحی و مسلمون نداریم، همه با هم برابر و یکسان هستن.
It's made to seem normal that people face drone attacks, depleted uranium attacks, that this is put into a formula, a psychological warfare formula that keeps being amped up, this ISIL concoction. It's like some kind of Hollywood horror story.
1979, the birth year of international terrorism. Actually, the attacks on the Manhattan area were the ignition to get this war on terror going. Research points to the year 1979 as the turning point for Western policy that, on the one hand, began to facilitate the covert warfare and destabilization via the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and on the other began to propagate the mime that has become known as international terrorism. 1979 definitely was pivotal for the United States as the CIA convened under Jimmy Carter to sign off on covert operations in Afghanistan before the Soviet invasion that would ultimately produce Al-Qaeda. The research dates back to 1982, reveals that at that same time the CIA was incubating the nascent Arab Foreign Legion in Afghanistan. In Israel, some familiar names were busily framing the concept of international terrorism at the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism, a paper by a student named Philip Paul titled International Terrorism, the Propaganda War. It has been cited separately by independent researcher Deanna Ralph as well as others. Well, for me, I think that we need to go back and look at the CIA's first coup d'etat, because at the same time of this 1979 conference on international terrorism with George Bush and cohorts, Bibi Netanyahu and whatnot, there was the Iranian hostage crisis, as they wanted to call it. But what was that caused by? Well, that was caused by the CIA's role in their first successful coup d'etat of Iranian leader Mohammad Mossadegh and installing a puppet, a ruler, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. The secret history written by CIA's chief coup d'etat planner says the operation's success was mostly a matter of chance. The document shows that the agency had almost complete contempt for the man that it was empowering, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, and it recounts for the first time that the agencies badly tried to seduce and force the Shah into taking part in his own coup. The operation, codenamed Operation Ajax, it was the blueprint for a succession of CIA plots to foment coups and destabilize governments during the Cold War, including the agency's successful coup in Guatemala in 1954 and the disastrous Cuban intervention known as the Bay of Pigs in '61. In more than one instance, such operations led to the same kind of long-term animosity towards the United States that occurred in Iran. The history says agency officers orchestrating the coup in Iran worked directly with royalist Iranian military officers, handpicked by the Prime Minister's replacement, sent a stream of envoys to bolster the Shah's courage, directed a campaign of bombings by Iranians posing as members of the Communist Party, and planned articles and editorial cartoons in newspapers. But on the night set for the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh's overthrow, almost nothing went according to the meticulously drawn-out plans. The secret history says, in fact, CIA officials were poised to flee the country when several Iranian leaders recruited by the agency, acting on their own, took command of the pro-Shah demonstration in Tehran and seized the government. 2 days after the coup, the history discloses agency officials funneled $5 million to Iran to help the government that they had installed in consolidating power. In 1979, when the hostage crisis took shape, it was as a result of the failing health of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and the CIA, now headed by George Herbert Walker Bush, had been making plans to install that Ayatollah Khomeini as their new U.S.-friendly puppet under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Iranian people suffered dramatically, and now they see in 1979, the same time as the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism, that the Bush CIA is now again going to install another puppet, and so they protested about it, you might say. Before we delve deeper into this whole War on International Terrorism conference in Jerusalem, I want to take you back a little bit further in history. That would be the period of the turn of the century and the leading up to World War I. Now, we already know that in 1913, the Rothschild banking dynasty and their other banker families had subdued the American monetary system. They already subdued 5 different European countries with their usury debt-based banking system known as fractional reserve lending. At the time, if we look at the Middle East in particular, this is during the World War I period, we see that actually part of their goal was to balkanize, that's to fracture the entire Middle East. The former Ottoman Empire was the target at the time. At that time, Iran was no part of the Ottoman Empire, but we know that as far as this Greater Israel project, that Iran is the final target for the Middle East. So with that in mind, we can go forward, and we'll go to in July of 1979, just as Zbigniew Brzezinski was creating the original Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Benjamin Netanyahu and a host of other notable names were meeting in Jerusalem Hilton 4 days. The subject was international terrorism, only a distant speck on the political horizon for Western countries at the time. 2 years later, Netanyahu published International Terrorism, Challenge and Response, an account of that conference consisting of all of the main speeches and some brief questions and answer sessions. Put simply, it reads like a post-9/11 neoconservative manifesto. Some 20 years prior to those attacks, of course, it isn't alone in this respect. It sits on the same shelves as PNAC document, Rebuilding Americans' Defenses. The purpose of the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism, JCIT, was obviously not to plan 9/11, but in Netanyahu's own words, quote, to focus attention on the high threat of that international terrorism poses to all democratic societies, to study the real nature of today's terrorism, and to propose measures for combating and defeating the international terrorism movements. International terrorism, forward by Benjamin Netanyahu, end quote. That's for public consumption, just so you know. Out of context, this may just seem like a beneficent foresight, but this forum, a man who just after 9/11, Netanyahu quotes, out of context, this may seem like a beneficent foresight, but this from a man who only just after 9/11 that Israel was benefiting from the attacks on 9/11. And the membership for the last conference most entirely consists of Zionist and American neoconservatives, that means dual national Israelis. Ben Zion Netanyahu, father of Benjamin, wrote the preface after dismissing the moral relativism of the man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Netanyahu Sr. goes on to explicitly define terrorism in his eyes: the deliberate and systematic killing of civilians so as to inspire fear. Under this definition, the attacks on the USS Cole in 2000 was not terrorism, as it was targeted military personnel. But the recent bombing of Gaza by Israel most definitely does count as terrorism, being as it is part of a concerted effort to drive the Palestinians to seek refuge in other countries. But this is only the start of the conference's outlining of the ideology, replete with doublethink and double standards and double speak. The particular irony is that the timing of the conference was after the Gladio network was well established at the exact same time as the U.S. was seeking to internationalize radical militant Islam to draw the Soviets into the Vietnam-style trap in Afghanistan. Some of the most blatant hypocrisy and deceptive rhetoric is found in the contribution of Professor Richard Pipes, a Polish-American historian who served as a consultant to Senator Henry Jackson, who attended the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism, is a close associate to Richard Pearl, and serving on both the Committee on the Present Danger, a long-standing Soviet threat scaremongering lobby group, and Team B, as well as being a member of the ubiquitous Council on Foreign Relations. As Adam Curtis covered the power of the nightmares, Team B was pure neoconservatism, ramping up the Soviet threat to justify increasing expenditures and more aggressive interventions around the world.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
None of the threat was real, but they didn't care in the slightest. By that point, the ideology was driving the U.S. intelligence community and foreign policy establishment, rather than any notion of facts or truth.
Nope, no weapons over there.
Team B was set up under President Gerald Ford of the Warren Commissioner, and one of its members was Governor Connolly, the second man to be wounded by the magic bullet during the Kennedy assassination. But its real masters were then CIA Director George H.W. Bush, who organized the JCIT along with Netanyahu. Richard Pipes at the helm of the group, General George Keegan, who attended the JCIT, and senior advisors Paul Wolfowitz and Paul Neitz, of the latter of which had founded the Committee for the Present Danger back in the 50s. They were no doubt ably assisted by Dick Cheney, then Chief of Staff in the Ford White House, and Donald Rumsfeld in his first stint Defense Secretary. The philosophy of this group was something akin to the precautionary principle, in that the lack of evidence of a conventionally understood threat only led Team B to conclude that the threat must be unconventional. There is no question that the threat is simply not there.
Maybe under here.
Remind you of anything? Well, the most obvious comparison is the Iraq's WMDs, which were not there, which we were told for months most definitely existed, but which clearly didn't, validating the earlier skepticism of former UN Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Bliss. Among many others, the same deceptive philosophy was amusingly employed by Donald Rumsfeld in his notorious comments in February of 2002. this butchering of the rationale or scientific concept of the threats, whereby the absence of evidence of a threat is no reason not to take the maximum possible reaction as if there were a maximum possible threat, was delightfully satirized by Boondocks and character of Jin Rummy. To conclude with this section of this 4-part series, we might as well accept the fact that this conference was the basis for Israel getting proxy militaries to fight their enemies, as the U.S. has been the muscle for this. Just like the land of Palestine was bought and paid for by American blood and money, this whole bit about American imperialism is also a farce. The bankers own the United States and they control it via Israel. History shows that Iran hasn't invaded or had a war of aggression in over 250 years. University of Michigan professor and polemist Juan Cole, for example, quote, Iran hasn't launched an aggressive war in modern history, unlike the U.S. or Israel, and its leaders have a doctrine of no first strike. If this is true of the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, as well as Revolutionary Guard commanders, retired Congressman Dr. Ron Paul likewise declared, quote, there is no history to show that Iranians are aggressive people. When's the last time they invaded another country? Over 200 years ago. Richard Falk, an emeritus Princeton professor and early advocate for the Ayatollah Khomeini, and later a UN official, he says the Iranian regime knows when it has a good thing going. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif yesterday tweeted, Iran hasn't attacked another country in over 250 years. But when Saddam Hussein rained missiles on us and gassed our people for 8 years straight, there was nobody there to help us. Between 1804 and 1813, Iran and Russia fought a bloody conflict in the Caucasus, which ended with the 1813 Treaty of Golestan. Iran's Khazar dynasty leader, Fath Ali Shah, admittedly at the goading of British and tempted by the promise of aid, broke the treaty and reinvaded the territory 13 years later. But what people have to understand is that they were trying to recapture a land that was actually confiscated by Russia.
Reports have just come out claiming that the United States and Israel have signed a secret deal to tackle the nuclear threat from Iran. So it looks like the deal isn't so secret anymore. The far-reaching Memorandum of Understanding was signed on December 12th at the White House following intense talks between both nations and plans to set up 4 teams to handle various aspects of the Iranian threat. One team will focus on Iranian activity in Syria and Lebanon. Another will deal with both diplomatic and intelligence activities to grapple with Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions. A third will tackle Iran's ballistic missiles programs. And the fourth will oversee preparations for any escalation by Iran or Hezbollah.
And then, just 2 days after that report broke, just 3 weeks after the plan itself was agreed, a wave of protests broke out across Iran. These protests, originating in discontent over the performance of the economy under the Rouhani government, soon morphed into rallies, riots, and violence aimed against the Iranian Republic itself.
Anti-government protests in Iran have continued for a 4th consecutive day Sunday in several parts of the country.
More protests and more defiance. Iranians took to the streets once again, despite warnings that the authorities would respond with an iron fist.
You know, that bold defiance is really almost unheard of in Iran, and it could be growing. The opposition group tells Fox News that there have been mass demonstrations against the regime in at least 31 cities, with some protesters calling for death to Khamenei, death to Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, and chanting the dictator must go, while pro-government counter-protests have blamed the resistance group itself for the unrest.
Could these protests be the result of the US and Israeli plan to undermine Iran? If these were just 2 isolated data points, then connecting these dots would be a stretch. But when we put recent events into their proper perspective, there is no doubt that the US, Israel, and their allies are actively supporting and fomenting regime change in Iran. And that's why we need to talk about the Iran protests. From the scattered and contextless news reporting of the mainstream media, it might appear that the protests happening right now are, in fact, a grassroots uprising against an unpopular and repressive regime. After all, this is what we are told by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
Now the Iranian dictatorship is trying to do what it always does, which is to say that the protests were designed by Iran's enemies. We all know that's complete nonsense. The demonstrations are completely spontaneous. They are virtually in every city in Iran. This is the precise picture of a long oppressed people rising up against their dictators.
And surely no one can make the case that the Iranian people do not have valid reason to be upset at their government. After years of rising unemployment and inflation, and dwindling hopes for a foreign investment boom, even Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is upset with the country's economic outlook under President Hassan Rouhani. The government's latest budget proposal, sent to Parliament just weeks ago, has only made things worse, cutting an extremely popular cash transfer program instituted under previous President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad that gave each Iranian a stipend of about $90 per month. The videos of the earliest demonstrations in this wave of protest, scattered footage of a few dozen protesters in the northeastern city of Mashhad calling for economic relief, are in line with the spontaneous uprising being touted by the political puppets and their mainstream media mouthpieces. But those early protests soon descended into chaos, mayhem, violence, and death.
In the most violent day of anti-government protests in Iran, at least 12 people were killed.
Sad news in terms of these protests and the consequences. What is the latest? What can you tell us?
Well, so far we know that officially between 12 and 16 people, as many as 16 people may have been killed.
Associated Press is now reporting that per Iranian state media, 9 more people were killed overnight, several of whom apparently tried to break into a police station to steal weapons.
Now, with dozens dead and hundreds arrested, the question has to be asked: have the initial grassroots protests been hijacked by regime change agents? The question is by no means outlandish. In June of 2017, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson admitted to Congress that the government is actively working with parties inside Iran to help foment regime change inside the country.
I'd like to know what the policy is of the U.S. toward Iran. Do we support the current regime? Do we support a philosophy of a regime change, peaceful regime change?
Our policy towards Iran is to push back on this hegemony, contain their ability to develop, obviously, nuclear weapons, and to work towards support of those elements inside of Iran that would lead to a peaceful transition of that government. Those elements are there, certainly, as we know.
That same month, it was revealed that the CIA has created a new mission center to focus exclusively on gathering and analyzing intelligence about Iran. Ramping the tension up even further, it was reported just this past week that the US has given the green light to Israel to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force, the overseas arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. All of this comes on the heels of repeated warnings by President Trump over the past year that the US was preparing operations against the Iranian government.
President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime, one that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing death to America, destruction to Israel, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this room. The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. The longest suffering victims of Iran's leaders are, in fact, its own people.
Donald Trump's made an ominous-sounding statement to journalists following a meeting with top US military officials at the White House. He suggested the talks on Thursday, during which North Korea and Iran were discussed, were a prelude to a major event, but then declined to comment further.
Could be the calm before the storm.
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out.
But perhaps this is just hot air, political bluster designed to throw the Iranians off balance. Maybe these comments and the sudden wave of violence in Iran are coincidental. Is there any reason to think that the US, Israel, and their allies are actually operating in Iran? To answer this question, we have to see the current unrest not as a spontaneous protest arising in an historical vacuum, but as the end result of a century of interference in Iranian politics. The modern era of Iranian politics traces back not to last month, but to 1951, when then-President of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the Iranian oil industry, revoking concessions that had been made to the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later rebranded as British Petroleum, half a century earlier. This enraged the British and put the Americans, embroiled in the Cold War and worried about Soviet influence in the region, on edge. Together, they hatched a plan, dubbed TP Ajax, and led by Kermit Roosevelt Jr., to topple the government and strengthen the rule of the US-friendly Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
The plan comprised of four main components. The first was to begin a propaganda campaign portraying Mossadegh as a communist. The second, to encourage the opposition to create disturbances. The third, to pressure the Shah to remove Mossadegh from power and select a new prime minister. And fourth, to support Fazlollah Zahidi as Mossadegh's replacement. With the propaganda campaign and support for the opposition well underway, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf arrived in Iran on August 1st, armed with large bags filled with millions of US dollars. Schwarzkopf met with Zahidi and the Shah to assure them of US support. Roosevelt also entered Iran secretly under alias James Lockbridge, and on the same day met with the Shah to discuss the execution of Operation Ajax. The Shah was to issue a decree to dismiss Mossadegh and replace him with Zahidi. On August 15th, the commander of the Imperial Guards, accompanied by 3 truckloads of soldiers, arrived at Mossadegh's home to issue his dismissal. Mossadegh's guards overwhelmed the soldiers and called for the immediate arrest of Zahidi, who was being hidden by the US in its embassy compound. The Shah, upon hearing of the coup's failure, fled to Baghdad, and the US began drawing up plans to pull Zahidi and Roosevelt out of the country. Roosevelt, hoping to make use of the failed coup attempt, hired a large crowd at the cost of $50,000 to pose as communist Tudor members and riot through the streets of Tehran, attacking mosques and statues of the Shah. Roosevelt also stepped up the propaganda campaign to link Mossadegh with the rioting communists. In preparation for the second coup attempt, the CIA began bribing army and police officials. August 19th was the date set by the CIA for its next attempt to overthrow Mossadegh. On the morning of August 19th, the same mob, hired 2 days earlier to pose as communist rioters, entered the center of Tehran and began threatening and intimidating passers-by and drivers to display pictures of the Shah. The police, having already been paid off, failed to intervene. The mob, then armed with knives, clubs, chains and sticks, began marching on Mossadegh's house. The CIA had told the mob to do everything possible to ensure the mob get as much attention as possible. Taking the advice rather literally, the mob had hired wrestlers, tumblers, jugglers and clowns. Zahidi came out of hiding from the US Embassy and drove to the state radio station to announce his takeover. The Shah's Imperial Guards began attacking Mossadegh's house with artillery, Sherman tanks and bazookas. Mossadegh had once again managed to escape over the back wall. The ensuing battle between the Imperial Guards, the hired mob and Mossadegh's guards claimed over 300 lives. Among those killed were the hired mob members who had been found with money still in their pockets, given to them that very morning by CIA agents. The same day, Zahidi declared himself Prime Minister, and the following day Mossadegh surrendered himself to the Shah's forces.
That 1953 coup casts a long shadow over Iranian politics in the modern era. The chain of events that foreign intervention set off led ultimately to the 1979 revolution, when the Iranian people, fed up with a Shah who was seen as an American puppet and who used his secret police to suppress political dissent, overthrew the government, and instituted the Islamic Republic. As newly declassified documents reveal, however, even Ayatollah Khomeini, the self-proclaimed enemy of the American empire, was careful to keep an open channel of communication with the American government, extending from his first contact with the Great Satan in November 1963, when he assured President Kennedy he was not opposed to American interests in Iran, to the midst of the revolution itself, when he assured President Carter that "you will see we are not in any particular animosity with the Americans," and insisted the oil flow will continue after the establishment of the Islamic Republic. According to the sources of FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds, who experienced the revolution directly as a resident of Iran, even the infamous hostage-taking itself was a prearranged bit of political theater, designed to play into the anger of the Iranian people at American intervention, even as it spared key American personnel from that wrath.
14, 15 years ago, through one of the legal firms that I worked with during my case, I got to know this investigator, PI, private part-time investigator, the firm had hired. Now, this man used to work for the CIA. He was an agent, and he spent years in Iran during Shah's regime. And his cover, he told me, he introduced himself, said, yes, and he actually spoke Farsi, and I speak Farsi. I said, wow, how did you learn? He said, well, I lived in Iran. I worked for the State Department / the agency, and his cover was the radio announcer for the English language radio in Iran, broadcast from the embassy. That's one of the common covers there. And he said, you know, the hostage taking, that infamous scene that whenever they talk about Iran, U.S. mainstream media, guess what they always like to show? They like to show that, you know, these bearded men going there and taking over the U.S. embassy, and they're taking these poor Americans as hostage, barbarics, you know. I think that is the most famous scene that has been played billions of times by the U.S. media. It's always pointed at by the U.S. media because of their masters wanting that scene being like this thing. You say Iran, the first thing people think, visualize is that hostage taking, those barbaric animals, you know? Well, he was there and he said 5-6 days before the hostage taking, we, State Department, CIA special staff members were given a notice, cable, to immediately leave Iran and go to, and they gave us option, Greece, Turkey, Tunisia, etc. Have some vacation time, beach time, you know, and then don't come back to the United States until we got our next assignment for whatever country. So he said, I packed immediately. It was like immediate now. You're leaving Iran. All the embassy people who were connected to CIA, anybody high level, were given notice to immediately leave Iran 5 days before that hostage taking. So the only ones who were left there, they were some administrative people. None of them were really CIA. They got all the key staff and they got them out of the country. Okay. And they left those poor patsies there to suffer, the administrative people. So that hostage taking incident would take place. Now, you and I would say, therefore, it was some sort of a prearranged incident. They got heads up that the regime and the rebels, using rebels, they were going to take over the embassy. They were given timelines so that they could take the important staff, see the real bad guys, CIA people, out of the country, okay? And then leave a few poor Americans in there to go through the staged event. So you are looking at false flag. You are looking at a staged event.
But as much as those historical events have shaped the Iranian psyche and the Iranian body politic, the modern era of intervention against Iran began nearly 2 decades ago in secret planning meetings taking place in the bowels of the Pentagon.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, And by that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
The invasion of Iraq began in 2003, and by 2007, Seymour Hersh was reporting in the pages of The New Yorker that the Pentagon, living up to the plan revealed by Clark, had begun the redirection, an attempt to refocus attention away from the escalating quagmire in Iraq and toward the neocons' next target, Iran. This redirection involved the US allying with Sunni forces in the region, including radical Wahhabi Sunnis and even al-Qaeda-affiliated groups, to sow chaos throughout the Middle East and to undermine the Iranian government and its regional allies. That same year, Globalist insider and CFR member Gary Hart wrote a warning to the Iranian government about the US government's ability to use a false flag event to start a war. In Hart's warning, entitled Unsolicited Advice to the Government of Iran, he cites the United States' history of using staged and provocateur events as a pretense for attacking their enemies, citing the Gulf of Tonkin, USS Maine, and Pearl Harbor as historical precedents. Predictably, Hart was never confronted on these statements by the mainstream media, but when confronted by independent citizen reporters at We Are Change, he admitted that he was warning of a possible false flag attack that was being planned at the highest levels of the US government to justify a bombing strike on Iran.
Sir, was this not an outright threat veiled in doublespeak that the United States could stage an event to go to war with Iran? No? Then
well, what I was tongue-in-cheek saying was that we have an administration in Washington that is dying for a reason to bomb Iran. And so in a mock blog letter to the Iranian government, not the president, but the Iranian government, I just simply said, unless you people want to be bombed, you better be careful about cross-border incursions. And I think I explicitly said, keep the Republican Guard or the Revolutionary Guard or whatever it's called away from the Iraqi border. I was trying to communicate to the American people what our own government was trying to plan, and that was to find a reason for bombing Iran. And I was simply saying, in effect, to the American people through this mock letter, be very careful about this administration creating a USS Maine incident or a Gulf of Tonkin incident that would justify bombing Iran. That's all.
In 2008, Seymour Hersh revealed a plan drawn up by Dick Cheney to build fake Iranian PT boats and to dress US troops as Iranians in order to attack American ships, thus tricking the public into believing that the Iranians had attacked America.
One of the items was, why not, there was a dozen ideas proffered, how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard build 4 or 5 irate boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up. Might cost some lives. And it was ejected because you can't have Americans killing Americans. But that's the level of stuff we were talking about, provocation.
At the same time, Israel and the US launched a cartoonish Iraqi WMD-like propaganda campaign to convince the world that Iran was developing a nuclear weapons program. And, just like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, the Iranian nuclear threat was a deliberate fabrication. Not only did the IAEA repeatedly confirm that there is no evidence Iran diverted any nuclear material into any military program, but the US intelligence community itself concluded in its own national intelligence estimate in 2011 that Iran was not trying to build a nuclear bomb. Incredibly, even Mossad contradicted its own prime minister by confirming in leaked cables that Iran was not performing the activity necessary to produce weapons. And, to the surprise of absolutely no one, it was later revealed that the CIA had been running an operation to plant evidence of nuclear weapons involvement on Iran. But perhaps the greatest irony of all is that there actually is an ongoing terror threat in the Persian Gulf. But that threat does not come from Iran. It is targeted at Iran. Take Stuxnet, for example. One of the most sophisticated and malicious computer worms ever devised, Stuxnet was discovered in 2010 and was quickly found to be designed specifically to sabotage the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz. It has since been revealed that Stuxnet was only one part of a much larger cyber attack against Iran, jointly launched by the US and Israel, and dubbed Nitro Zeus. Then there is the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, or MEK, a US State Department designated terrorist organization that has been responsible for bombings, attempted plane hijackings, political assassinations, and indiscriminate killings of men, women, and children in their attempt to overthrow the government of Iran. Naturally, it is openly supported by Rudy Giuliani, Joe Lieberman, Newt Gingrich, and a bevy of other politicians who are able to flaunt America's laws against supporting terrorists because the MEK, being against Iran, are the right kind of terrorists. Then there are the assassinations of Iranian scientists that were confirmed to have been the work of Mossad, and the recent Israeli bombing in Syria that was done based on a poorly sourced BBC report that indicated that there may be an Iranian military base near Damascus. Time and again, the US, Israel, and their willing regional ally the Saudis have attacked, threatened, provoked, and staged events to draw Iran into war. And time and again, these attacks and provocations go utterly unreported in the mainstream press, while politicians on both sides of the phony left-right divide allude to nameless transgressions of the Iranians. It is only in this context that we can possibly hope to come to an understanding of the events taking place in Iran today. Let's be clear. This is not to say that the government of Hassan Rouhani is above reproach. This is not to say that the mullahs are brave defenders of freedom and liberty. This is not to say that the actions of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are always and forever wholesome and virtuous. This is not to say that the Iranian people are all happy with their government and that any and all unrest is only the work of outside forces. These are the straw man arguments by which defenders of this renewed push for regime change in Iran try to shift the focus and muddy the waters. The point is that any and all decisions about what happens in Iran should be the work of the Iranian people. If Iraq and Libya and Syria have taught us anything, it is that the humanitarian intervention rallying cry is a sham, a false pretense used to whip up public support for the next regime change operation. They cried crocodile tears over the poor, beleaguered people of Libya, but once the love bombs had been dropped and the country was torn apart, not another moment was spent worrying about the country. Today, there are open slave markets operating outside Tripoli, but not one word of remorse from the warmongers whose military intervention brought that about. They cried crocodile tears over the poor, oppressed people of Syria, and then proceeded to fund, arm, train, and equip a terrorist insurgency that eventually morphed into ISIS under the careful tutelage of these humanitarian warhawks. And now, the very same people who have been calling for the deaths of untold scores of Iranians are now pretending to care about the Iranian people.
I think the root cause of this, Stephanie, is that the Iranian people don't have freedom, and they would like freedom. I mean, you can get upset about the very minimal sanctions President Trump put on the IRGC. His policies have not fundamentally affected anything. And if companies don't want to help the IRGC, the ruling regime in Iran, that's fine with me. Let's be more respectful of the Iranian people's desire for freedom.
Well, with all due respect, Bill, you've been arguing to bomb Iran for so long, so I don't know if you're really respecting the Iranian people. You've been advocating killing Iranians, so I don't think you or the Trump administration have the credibility to now say that you care for the Iranian people.
Hold on.
It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's about the Iranian people. Do you stand with the Iranian people? Do you stand with the Iranian people against the regime?
Of course I do. That's exactly why
Okay, good. Fine. We're in agreement. We're in agreement.
That they actually move towards a more democratic situation without killing them.
No, this is not about the plight of the poor Iranian people. This is about achieving a key American, Israeli, Saudi geopolitical objective. As the dust settles on this wave of protests, it is most likely that the Iranian government will not be toppled. The opposition is unorganized, unarmed, and not drawing the masses of crowds that we have seen in previous color revolutions. But this is an ominous sign of things to come as the recent American-Israeli agreement on Iran comes to light. The only question is whether the people of the world are going to fall for yet another regime change operation.
I heard today Iran's President Rouhani's claim that Israel is behind the protests in Iran. It's not only false, it's laughable.
General Wesley Clark called 9/11 a policy coup, but let's hear what former Congresswoman Dr. Cynthia McKinney has to say about it.
And there's no more special interest that has any more influence than the pro-Israel lobby. What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents. And I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city, the military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. I made it public, and then, the excuse was, well, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed. And but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress.
Oh yeah, and it gets worse. The government can now legally kill Christians. Bill Dannemeyer, U.S. Congressman, 1979 to 1992. Your U.S. government can now legally kill Christians for the crime of worshiping Jesus Christ. A diabolical deception has been perpetrated on the American people by their own leaders, senators and congressmen who have sold their soul to the devil on March 5th, 1991 in the House of Representatives and on March 7th, 1991 in the U.S. Senate without any knowledge of or input by the people of the United States. U.S. senators and congressmen passed a law that is so outrageous and frankly unconstitutional that it forces the American people to be bound by a set of monstrous rules called the no-hide laws, rules that make the belief in Jesus Christ a crime punishable by decapitation, by guillotine. On March 20th, 1991, President George Hubert Walker Bush, a supposed Christian, but we know better, he's actually an Ashkenazi Jew, signed the bill into law. Before you respond, no, that can't be so. Not in our free country. Let me explain. The passage of this law, H.J. Res. 104, is especially troublesome to me because I was a member of the House of Representatives at the time it was passed. Even worse, I was in the House chamber the very day it was passed, voting on other legislation. Yet, as a U.S. congressman, had no knowledge that it had been passed or that it was to be brought up for a vote. How could the deception be so pervasive that those of us who had sworn to uphold the country's constitution, particularly those of few indeed, who really took our position seriously as the protectors of the people, could be totally in the dark regarding the content of this bill and its passage by the leaders of this country by treachery and deceit? Here's how it happened. On January 31st, 1991, an innocuous-sounding resolution was introduced designating March 26, 1991 as Education Day in the U.S. It was purposely given this name to deceive the American people. It was, in fact, a double deception because not only did the resolution have nothing to do with education, it was also deceptively billed as a vehicle for recognizing the 89th birthday of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But in truth, the resolution was nothing less than a secret, underhanded plot to control the American people by the no-hide laws, a subterfuge for the elimination of Christianity and the elimination of all Christians and the enslavement of all remaining Gentiles.
Hey guys, it's 10:42 p.m. on October 21st, 2017, and I watched two videos today that pertain to the same subject, both by two big channels. One is a call for an uprising, and the other one here is Truth Stream Media. And they both have to do with this outrage that these poor folks in Dickinson, Texas, can't get any of the relief funds that we American people have donated because those funds are under the jurisdiction of the municipal corporation of the city of Dickinson, unless these people sign an agreement that they will, by executing this agreement below, the applicant verifies that the applicant does not boycott Israel and will not boycott Israel during the term of this agreement. So let me just resketch this for you. The bulk of these videos that I saw today outline the fact that Hurricane Harvey victims, specifically in the example cited here in the city of Dickinson, Texas, can't get any of their money unless they agree to not boycott Israel. Now, that should outrage you, and it does. It outrages me very much. And the reason being is because the state of Texas has entered into an agreement that it won't do business or enter into contracts with an individual or an organization that has not agreed to this kind of a term, that they won't boycott Israel. So if you want to do business in the state of Texas, you have to be ready to sign a verification not to boycott Israel. That's just the law in the state of Texas now. It's not just the law in Texas, though. It's a law in many states. So I'll leave it to you guys to investigate if your state actually has this asinine pro-Israel law. Okay? Now, if your state is that dumb, I guess that's just the way it is. It probably is the same way in Michigan. We've got lots of pro-Israel people in Michigan, but that's just on a state level. Let's take a picture at what these guys failed to mention. What these guys failed to mention is this law, S-720, that has been circulating in Congress since March of 2017. This law makes these videos, the things these videos are complaining about, it makes them look like a laugh. This law outright criminalizes supporting a boycott against Israel. That's right. This law, 720, is called the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. This law will make it a crime, not just a small crime, not just a slap on the hand or a citation or you don't get your hurricane money. This law puts you in jail for 20 years. Yes, guys, I said 20 years and a $250,000 fine. I'm not kidding. Read the bill. The link is in the description. Let me just read you part of what this says. For half a century, Congress has combated anti-Israel boycotts and other discriminatory activity. I'm just going to stop right there. If I had sound effects in my videos, you'd hear a brake on a car going, because this right there should just hit you across the head. What the hell is our Congress doing combating anti-Israel anything? Who does this Congress of ours work for? It's a good question, isn't it? Well, since 43% of Congress, 43% of the seated Congress right now has a dual citizenship with Israel, you really need to wonder. Because this act, this bill right here, will criminalize political speech. That means if this bill passes, which it may have passed, I don't know. I haven't been able to figure that out yet. I didn't do much research on it today. It could have passed. If this bill passed, this video would put me in prison for 20 years. And when it passes, because I'm sure it's going to pass, buying a boycott Israel bumper sticker will get you a $250,000 fine. So yeah, it kind of sucks if you don't get your money because you don't agree to not boycott Israel. But it really sucks more if you get 20 years in prison because you don't agree with this. Okay, so if you're pro-boycott. Now, some people don't know why boycott. What's the big deal with the boycotts? Here's the issue. In March of this year, the United Nations Human Rights Coalition did the only thing I've ever agreed with the United Nations on is this. They have called all countries in the world to boycott doing business with Israeli quote-unquote settlements. Now, if you don't know what a settlement is, let me explain this to you really quick. These green little areas are where Palestinian people live. This is all that's left of the Palestine country, right here. That's it. Israel has chopped them up into tiny, tiny little pieces. These people can't even cross from one part to another, but that's a whole separate story. I urge you guys to investigate what Israel has done to Palestine. It is egregious. It is a horrible, horrible thing what they've done. But see how these little green little areas have blue splotches all over them? Well, here's what happens. Just like what happened in Dickinson, Texas. A huge flood came through and destroyed all the property in Dickinson, Texas. Well, if they happen to be one of these Israeli towns, Israel would come in and start building up property there. Come in with bulldozers, knock over the housing structures in Palestine, and start building Israeli homes. And companies like Remax go in and sell those homes. So it's as if the Palestinian people are just being erased. Okay, we just had a whole bunch of fires go through Santa Rosa, California. It would be no different than if where those houses were razed to the ground, if the Palestinian or the Israeli people came and built subdivisions there and wouldn't let the California people return to their homes. You know, the Palestinian people are homeless. You know, they're in refugee camps, quite literally refugee camps, while these stupid Israelis go in and build condo complexes and sell them to American citizens who go over there to become Israeli citizens. It's disgustingly grotesque, makes me want to puke. It's evil. Okay, so finally, the United Nations, and the only thing it's ever done that I actually agree with is to suggest that nations boycott doing business with the Israeli settlements. It only makes sense. They don't have any right to the land. Well, here's the problem. Our Congress disagrees. Our Congress is so pro-Israel that is making it a law right now. If you support that UN embargo and that UN boycott, you can go to prison for 20 years. A U.S. citizen cannot have that opinion if this law passes. Okay, now why is this happening? Well, I have a feeling part of this is because there's 43% of our Congress happens to be Israeli citizens. Another thing has to do with the fact that nobody knows how the term Israel is really defined, including those quote-unquote Christians who live in the quote-unquote Bible Belt, which is just a gross irony. Because the word Israel is defined in the Bible, and they seem to have missed what it means. So I'm going to show you, because I know what the Bible says, I'm going to show you what the Bible says and how the Bible defines Israel, because that's a big problem here. Israel, by the Bible's definition, is defined in Micah 5:2. And this is where you hear about the Bethlehem shepherd, the shepherd that comes from Bethlehem. He's the ruler of Israel. This is a prophecy about the shepherd that's going to come from Bethlehem, that it's going to be the ruler of God's people, Israel. Okay? In Matthew 2:6, that ruler has come, that governor has come. And there's a reference to that last passage right here. It says, "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least of the princes of Judah, for out of you shall come a governor that will rule my people Israel." So, what do we learn here? We learn that Israel is a people that is ruled by the governor that comes from Bethlehem. All you guys have to do is go shopping during Christmas at any mall, and you're going to hear who that shepherd from Bethlehem is. That's Jesus Christ. It's not Netanyahu. It's not Ben-Gurion. Okay? But for some reason, these people who think that they're Christians don't know that Jesus Christ is the ruler of Israel. The people are Israel. It's the people are Israel, and that's Jesus Christ is their ruler. So obviously, those folks that are set up over there in the Middle East that call themselves Israel, they're not Israel. Okay? They're the Antichrist because they're filled with Jews. Now, why do I say that that's Antichrist? Well, because a Jew is defined in the Bible as someone who comes from the tribe of Judah. Well, we haven't been able to tell who comes from the tribe of Judah since 70 AD. This is really important. A lot of people don't realize this. But the temple records, where everybody's genealogical records were established to say if they came from the tribe of Benjamin or the tribe of Levi or the tribe of Judah, those records were kept in a temple in Jerusalem. And that temple burned down in 70 AD. And since 70 AD, that's like almost 2,000 years ago, you guys. For 2,000 years, we haven't been able to tell who comes from Judah and who doesn't. So this idea that there are still Jews today is another completely anti-biblical idea. Let's see what Jesus says about Jews who say they're from the tribe of Judah but aren't. He calls them the synagogue of Satan. Now, you guys may not believe the Bible, but you at least have to use the Bible's definitions if you're going to use the Bible's terms, okay? And since the Jews who call themselves Jews but aren't, we can't tell if they're coming from the tribe of Judah because nobody's known for 2,000 years, if the Bible calls those people the synagogue of Satan, they're definitely not God's chosen people, okay? Let's just get this straight. Those people who say they are Jews but are not Jews because they don't come from the tribe of Judah, those people are liars, and they are the synagogue of Satan. And it doesn't just say it once, it says it twice. Those who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie because they have no way of proving they're from the tribe of Judah since the temple's been burned since 70 AD, they are the synagogue of Satan. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but considering that this is a very biblical issue here, Israel, okay, this is not God's chosen people. This is a blasphemy. This is an abomination. This is a complete misuse of the term Israel. Those people in Palestine that are calling themselves Israel, who are doing this to other people, they are so not Israel. God tells Israel, the children of Israel, how to behave, and they are supposed to love their neighbor as themselves. And believe me, these people are not loving their neighbor as themselves. But since the whole world is being led astray by this false definition of Israel and the synagogue of Satan, quite literally, you guys, if you don't read the Bible, you're not going to understand what the hell is going on here. But this is very, very serious. Our U.S. lawmakers want to make it a minimum civil penalty of $250,000 and a maximum criminal penalty of $1 million and 20 years in prison for going against the state of Israel. I mean, honestly, you guys, we have really big problems in our country right now. And if you guys don't look at the fires and the earthquakes and the floods and all that stuff and start coming to some understanding that there is Antichrist rising and that the terms that are actually laid out in the Bible actually apply to the monsters that are doing these things, and our own government is trying to take away our liberties so we can't stand against Antichrist, you guys, just seriously, start reading the scriptures. Start reading the laws that are unfolding around you. Start looking at the world around you. It's a lot more than hurricane victims not getting their money. This is very, very serious times we're heading into. And I thought I would bring you the bigger picture because it seems like everybody's mute and deaf and blind on this stuff.
And there's one thing that was failed to mention right there, and it really is pertinent because these Jews, or the Jewish-only state of Israel, would be like a blood thing, you know, like you need to prove that you're a Jew by blood. Well, in Genesis 10, 1 through 3, it states, the table of nations. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. Genesis 10:2, the Japhites, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Mesha, and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer, his oldest son, was Ashkenaz. That's his oldest son. That's the Ashkenazims. That's the ones that the Khazarian theory backs up. This Bible verse alone. They are not the blood of the Semitic people that came from the lineage of Shem. All of the Abrahamic religion folks came from the lineage of Shem.
Now, the first reaction to Trump's announcement that he was going to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem certainly was one that would make a very negative reaction from us and really the whole world. In fact, not one nation of 82 nations that involved in all this announced that they're going to move their embassy to Jerusalem. So at the first point of this announcement, it became a black pill, in a sense. One more betrayal of Donald Trump under the Jewish vice, under the Jewish pressure, under the Jewish hostage chains that they're trying to wrap him in, saying, unless you go along with us, we're going to destroy you and your presidency. But now, on a lot of reflection and doing some research over the last 24 hours, I believe that Donald Trump, the goy, knows. The goy knows. In a brilliant move, Trump strikes back at the Jewish power elite out to destroy him. By simply recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state, President Trump has struck a mighty blow against the criminal Jewish supremacist state of Israel. But Donald Trump may have done the ultimate deep chess, or what they call 3D chess move, and by giving in to these radical Jews, what he's done is he's totally undermined our policy. First off, so when this move was announced, basically, it was really a betrayal of American interests, American principles in many ways, but in the process, it really exposed Jewish power in the United States of America. And it undermined Israel in every serious way. And we spend over the last 50, 60, 70 years now, we have spent the equivalent of over $100,000 for every American taxpayer supporting Israel, a nation where none of those people are paying American taxes. So by making this essentially meaningless gesture, Trump has actually incredibly damaged the state of Israel. Now, let's make it clear that there's another thing that this has done. It really exposed the Jewish swamp, the Jewish deep state that controls America. Because the whole world, and America too, is now seeing how much Trump is a hostage to this Jewish power. Trump is fighting right now for his life, and he knows who the attacks against Trump are coming from. And they just don't want to remove him from office. They want to destroy him, his sons, his family, his life. They really want to put him in jail. There's no way that they are going to do anything less than that with all their power. And we're seeing this entirely. Every one of the major contributors to Clinton were Jewish extremists who were also Zionists. And this move of America, of the embassy, is not going to be best for Israel, for sure. Maybe that's why Trump did it. Maybe Trump is striking back. You know, the empire strikes back. The president strikes back. Maybe by giving in on this particular issue, which is basically symbolic, what he's done is he's struck a knife in the heart of these Jewish, racist, tribalist Zionists who are leading the world, America and the world, to disaster. It's amazing that I really do believe this, that Trump is a goy who knows. He's got to know who's leading the effort against them. He tries to accede to them in some ways, but maybe this action was one of the most brilliant political maneuvers ever, because no president has ever done more to undermine Jewish power, expose Jewish power, and undermine the state of Israel and its plans for the Middle East, Israel hegemony in the Middle East, than this simple little action by Donald Trump. What do you think about that, Mark?
Find you acting on your best behavior. Turn your back on Mother Nature. Everybody wants to rule the world.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
By the rivers of Babylon, we wept as we remembered Zion. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill.
Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The word goy is most often used among Jews to refer to someone who is not Jewish. Translated to English, it means nation, but not the Jewish nation. So when you see the word nation, think Gentile nations. Jewish supremacist Bibi Netanyahu quoted Isaiah at the UN. The book of Isaiah is about enslaving the Gentiles. As the prophet Isaiah said, "I have made you a light unto the Gentile nations, bringing salvation to the ends of the earth." Today, 2,700 years after Isaiah spoke these prophetic words, Israel is becoming a rising power among the Gentile nations. Isaiah 61:5. Foreigners will be your servants. They will feed your flocks and plow your fields and tend your vineyards. Verse 6. And you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of Gentile nations, and in their riches you will boast. When you have your They Live glasses on, you'll see, Ye shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall ye boast yourselves. Former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef, publicly said that non-Jews exist to serve Jews. Goyim were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel. Why are Gentiles needed? They will work, they will plow, they will reap, we will sit like an effendi and eat. With Gentiles, it will be like any person. They need to die, but God will give them longevity. Why? Imagine that one's donkey would die. They'd lose their money. This is his servant. That's why he gets a long life, to work well for this Jew. When Ovadia Yosef died, Bibi was devastated. Also, 1.5 million Jews took to the streets of Jerusalem to mourn him. After Trump decided to recognize illegally occupied Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, 250 rabbis sent a thank you letter claiming that he is fulfilling prophecies. Ovadia Yosef's son was one of the rabbis who wrote this letter. With this recognition, we see the fulfillment of another step in the completion of the prophecy of Isaiah, that the Gentile nations of the world will recognize the centrality of Jerusalem.
On August 18th, at the Ramada Hotel in central Jerusalem, leading Israeli rabbis gathered to defend the publication of a book by one of their peers that cited rabbinic sources to justify the killing of non-Jews, including innocent children and families.
התשובה הייתה פשוטה. כולנו אומרים בהגדה של פסח, שפוך חמתך אל הגויים, שלא ידעוך על ממלכות השם.
Pour out your wrath on the Gentile nations that do not acknowledge you, on the kingdoms that do not call on your name. In 1986, Bibi wrote a book called Terrorism, How the West Can Win. In this book, he called for the West to wage war on Cuba, North Korea, Libya, Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. With the exception of Cuba, all of this is happening today. All of these countries refuse to recognize Israel as a legitimate state. He also lied about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. This was 15 years before Bush was in office. In 1995, he wrote another book called Fighting Terrorism. In this book, he called for restricting ownership of weapons and tightening gun control for Americans. Undoubtedly, the leaders of the United States in particular could be subjected to a barrage of criticism that they are curtailing civil freedoms and that they are overreacting. They should reject this criticism. Bibi already has the Palestinians disarmed, and his government passed a law sentencing Palestinians to 20 years in prison for throwing stones. Israel controls U.S. foreign policy, creating all these wars, and is also behind the police state measures. In 1962, Israel's founding Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion explained the concept of a New World Order in Look magazine. With the exception of the USSR as a federated Eurasian state, all other continents will be united in a world alliance, at whose disposal will be an international police force. All armies will be abolished, and there will be no more wars. In Jerusalem, the United Nations, a truly United Nations, will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federated union of all continents. This will be the seat of the Supreme Court of mankind to settle all controversies among the federated continents, as prophesied by Isaiah. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism? Think again. What Ben-Gurion said here was based on Judaism's end-of-days narrative, which we'll read off of Chabad's website. One of the principles of Jewish faith enumerated by Maimonides is that one day there will arise a dynamic Jewish leader, a direct descendant of the Davidic dynasty, who will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. All the Gentile nations of the world will recognize Moshiach to be a world leader and will accept his dominion. In the Messianic era, there will be world peace, no more wars. It also says nor famine and in general a high standard of living, but that's only for Jews.
But can you, okay, so, because I've heard other things, other religious groups, not you guys, who will say things like when the Messiah comes, that non-Jews will end up being like slaves to Jews and things like that. Is that part of, like, where does that come from?
What you're saying is correct. What you're saying is correct.
And what does it mean?
יעבדוך עמים. יעבדוך עמים. ישתחוו לחלומי. יעבדוך עמים. It says here, יעבדוך עמים. The lands will work for you. יעבדוך עמים. You see it?
Okay. Well, I'll ask in English. Do you believe that the Gentiles, the Goyim, will one day become the slaves of the Jews?
It's not a belief. It's part of the Torah.
Okay.
And they don't want the Jewish person to work.
אתה חושב שהגויים יהיו עבדים של היהודים יום אחד?
אמורים להיות.
אוקיי, מה זאת אומרת, כאילו, אמורים להיות?
לפי מה שכתוב בתורה, הגויים אמורים להיות העבדים שלנו.
אוקיי.
העם היהודי היה במשך כל השנים העם הכי נרדף. מצד שני, כשמשיח יבוא, הוא יהיה העם הכי נבחר אחרי כל מה שקרה לו במשך כל השנים.
האם אתה מאמין שהגויים יהיו עבדים של היהודים יום אחד?
כן, זה כתוב בתורה.
אוקיי, ומה זה אומר?
כל מה שכתוב בתורה אני מאמין.
כן? ומה כתוב? כתוב בפירוש שהגויים יהיו עבדים שלנו?
כן, כתוב שאחרי ביאת המשיח, אני אומר, כתוב אחרי ביאת המשיח, אני לא יכול להביא את הפסוק המדויק, אבל כתוב שאחרי ביאת המשיח יהיה מלחמה מאוד מאוד גדולה, ובסופו של דבר כן, הגויים יהיו עבדים של היהודים במשך תקופה, ואחרי זה העולם יחזור כאילו לקדמותו. זה מה שאני...
אוקיי.
על כל... טוב, אני לא עוד פעם להביא את המספר המדויק, על כל יהודי אמור להיות 800 או יותר עבדים.
שמע נתניהו, ברכה בהונגריה, שמע ואני צריך מגיזם, ברכה בהצלחה, תפלאי ובתושיע, באתי לבקש את זה, בכל העניינים, גם הלאומיים. מה שישראל לאחרונה, זאת מתצו כמה עניינים. התפתחו כמה. מה שרואה עוד, וגם משהו שעדיין משאיר ליבו. אז הייתה משהו ומה הגיעתו. ועושים.
President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
That rabbi who told Bibi to hurry up and bring the Messiah is named Menachem Sneerson. His nickname is the Rebbe. He was the leader of Chabad Lubavitch until his death. Trump's Jewish son-in-law, Jared Kushner, visits the Rebbe's grave to receive inspiration and blessing. Kushner is also financing Chabad Lubavitch, a messianic Jewish supremacist movement which is hell-bent on ruling the world from Jerusalem. Kushner is involved in moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and he also owns the 666 Fifth Avenue building in Manhattan.
After 70 AD, the Jews were scattered throughout all of the world, and there came a time when Jews were not even allowed to live or visit Jerusalem. They wanted, of course, to rebuild their temple, and thanks to the Temple Institute, which is just behind us, all the plans are already made. The sacrificial altar has been recently constructed. The priest robes have been made. Pretty much everything is ready to go.
Robert, help us understand, why is it so important to the Jewish religion to rebuild their temple? What is the significance of the temple to them?
Well, Chris, there's many important reasons, but the primary reason, the number one reason, is the Jewish people do not believe their Messiah will arrive until that temple is rebuilt.
For the first time since the past 2,000 years within our generation, we are seeing these preparations for the rebuilding of the temple. They are training the priest. They have the implements in place.
There will be a daily offering in the morning, a daily offering in the afternoon, special offerings on the Sabbath and holidays. The Passover sacrifice, all of those will be brought again, and the future temple will stand forever.
The plans for the third temple are already in place. Problem is, the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque are in the way. Those are two of the holiest sites in Islam, and many Muslims see the Jewish Messiah as the Antichrist, or what they would call Dajjal. Some Christians also see the Jewish Messiah as Antichrist. If Israel were to destroy the holy sites and rebuild their temple, the Muslim countries would wage war. Despite this, multiple Israeli officials are calling for the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock so the third temple could be built.
It's the end of days. You're going to need the iron of Esav, which represents Edom, which is the West, Europe, and the Americas, to get intermixed with Ishmael, which is basically Arabs and Muslims. How in the world was this ever going to happen if not for this refugee crisis? At the end of days, you're going to have this intermixing between Esav, Edom, which is the West, and the East, which is the Muslims and the Arabs, making this through this influx into the world. And they're going to have children, you know, I don't want to say by the dozens, but they're going to have a far larger birth rate than the indigenous people there, and they're going to sort of conquer by number. And there are many different sources for this. One of them in Yehezkel, chapter 14, and many other sources as far as this is concerned, where it's mentioned very, very vividly what will happen to the Jews and what will happen to Yerushalayim and what will happen to the world at that time, where there will be many, many people killed and so on and so forth. So the idea of having these refugees come into Europe, it's no longer a matter of whether it's right or wrong. It's just simply a fulfillment of what it was meant to be all along. This is the fulfillment of, the Chazal and the prophecies. This has to happen, and this is just another sign that we are nearing, the completion of this tikkun of the entire world.
Le Mashiach viendra que quand Edom, l'Europe, la chrétienté sera totalement tombée. Donc je vous pose la question, c'est une bonne nouvelle que l'islam envahisse l'Europe? C'est une excellente nouvelle, ça annonce la venue de Mashiach. Excellente nouvelle.
Vous allez le payer très cher, les Européens. Mais à un point, vous n'avez même pas notion de quoi on parle. Et vous n'aurez pas à fuir. Parce que tout le mal que vous avez fait à Israël, vous le paierez au centuple. Quand l'Italie disparaîtra, quand Edom, c'est pour ça que le QG de la chrétienté qui vient de Esav se trouve là-bas, quand cet endroit-là disparaîtra, et c'est ce que veut faire l'islam, il s'occupe. L'islam, c'est le balai d'Israël, sachez-le.
As you just heard, their Messiah will arrive after Christianity is destroyed, which is why the rabbis want to destroy Europe. The end of days states that when their Messiah arrives, there will be one religion practiced, and that's Judaism. Some of you watching this may hate all Abrahamic religions, and that's fine. This video is about understanding the end of days narrative. Benzi Gopstein, the leader of Lahava, which receives money from the Israeli government, called for churches to be burned down. He said, "Did the Rambam rule to destroy idol worship or not? Idol worship must be destroyed." And that's what the Jews are doing, burning down churches. They burned down the church where Jesus fed 5,000 and graffitied false gods to be eliminated. Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, founder and head of the Temple Institute, called for the genocide of Muslims and Christians who don't forfeit their religion. When these rabbis talk about peace, that means peace for the Jewish people. He said, "What is meant by peace? Maimonides says that they must agree to follow the 7 Noahide laws, meaning you ask them, do you follow the 7 laws? If so, we allow you to live. If not, you kill all of their males by sword. You only leave the women. How do you leave them? They must all agree to follow the 7 laws, and that this is how you impose the 7 laws on that city. We will conquer Iraq, Turkey, we will get Iran too. We will impose the 7 Noahide laws on all of these places. You say, I call upon you in peace. If they raise the flag of surrender and say from now on there is no more Christianity, no more Islam, the mosques and the Christian spires and their crosses come down, from now on we follow the 7 Noahide laws. Ariel went on to suggest that the Jewish people should also kill President Barack Obama. Therefore, Maimonides says that if you see a person in the street who does not follow the 7 laws, this is what he says: if we have the might, you have to kill him. If you catch Obama on the street and you know that he does not follow the 7 laws, etc., a man in the audience interjected, you are commanded to kill him. This is what ISIS is doing in the Middle East with Sharia law, executing Muslims and Christians, then being treated at hospitals in Israel. The Jewish supremacists who control our governments also want to enforce Noahide laws on us. Rabbis Yitzhak Shapira and Yosef Elitzer wrote in King's Torah, it is permissible to kill the righteous among Gentile nations, even if they are not responsible for the threatening situation, adding, if we kill a Gentile who has sinned or has violated one of the 7 commandments, because we care about the commandments, there's nothing wrong with the murder. Remember former Chief Sephardic Rabbi Ovadia Yosef? Well, his son Yitzhak Yosef is now the Chief Sephardic Rabbi of Israel, and he said that non-Jews are forbidden from living in the land of Israel, adding that some non-Jews live in Israel to serve the Jewish population. Bibi's wife, Sarah, is being sued for treating her staff like slaves. There was an ad on a bus in Israel, and Jewish-owned Mondowise has provided us with a translation. Statement of the Kingdom from the teaching instructions of the Lubavitcher Rabbi. The Gentile does not want anything. He waits to be told what the Jew wants. Leviticus 25:44. Your male and female slaves are to come from the Gentile nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. Verse 45. You may also purchase the children of temporary residents who live among you, including those who have been born in your land. You may treat them as your property. Verse 46. Passing them on to your children as a permanent inheritance. You may treat them as slaves, but you must never treat your fellow Israelites this way. This is slavery in the Torah, not the Talmud. No such thing as an Israelite slave. A great example of this would be Israel's prostitution industry, which consists of Eastern European sex slaves trafficked into the country.
Потому что это ад был. Голодать. Никого ты не знаешь нигде. Чужая страна. Тебя как к этим обращаются как собаки.
This is a billion-dollar industry. The government turns a blind eye to the point that the United Nations named Israel as one of the main destinations in the world for trafficked women.
But what we see today is that not one stone of the temple is left upon another. But the temple will be rebuilt in the future. Not hard to believe at all. That's what the Jews have been planning for decades. Why do you think they're even back over there?
This has been our goal from Israel's first day. It was here that our temple stood, our kings ruled, our prophets preached. Jerusalem has been the focus of our hopes, our dreams, our prayers for 3 millennia.
Why do you think thousands of years later the nation of Israel is back in existence? Why? Because the Zionist Jews have gone there with a plan and a desire to eventually rebuild that temple and dominate the entire world from Jerusalem. And they will rule over the Gentiles. That's what they believe. And they're going to do it with the Antichrist at the helm. And what's going to happen is they're going to rebuild the temple, and they're going to reinstitute the daily morning and evening sacrifice at the temple in Jerusalem. You will see animal sacrifices being performed once again.
People will try to be politically correct and say Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. Well, let's go to the Zionist plan for the Middle East by Professor Israel Shahak. In his complete diaries, volume 2, page 711, Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, says that the area of the Jewish state stretches from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. Herzl took that from the Torah, Genesis 15:18. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, I give this land to your offspring, from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River. Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked and other members of the Israeli government admit that they believe this. In Herzl's book, The Jewish State, he often refers to Israel as the Promised Land. Here's a quote from Abraham Isaac Kook, the chief rabbi of British Mandatory Palestine. From Zion will come forth Torah. What we're seeing is, through Zionism, Jewish extremists are fulfilling the Torah.
בסדר, אנחנו ניתן לכם לחם, אבל אנחנו, זה אדמה שלנו, לא ניתן לך. מותק, אמרנו שיש שלום ויש שתי מדינות, מדינה ב-77, צריך לי נחשי אללה. תלך תעשה לחם במדינה שלך.
פה זה המדינה שלי?
לא, זה לא נכון.
זה לא נכון.
לא נכון.
פה זה ארץ שלי.
וזה של אבא שלי, האדמה הזאת היא של אבא שלי, והנה.
האדמה הזאת היא לא של אבא שלי.
של אבא שלי.
האדמה הזאת...
הנה, זה יש לי ניירות, זה של אבא שלי.
האדמה הזאת זה שלנו, של ארץ ישראל, של יהודים. אתה יודע טוב. הקדוש ברוך הוא נתן לנו, ברצונו הקדוש ברוך הוא נתן לנו. שיבוא משיח בן דוד, אתם כולכם, תצלם רגע את כולם, תצלם את כולם. אתם כולכם, אתם תהיו עבדים שלנו אם תהיו ראויים, אם תתנהגו יפה.
The Rothschild family, who founded Israel, are religious Jews. This is admitted on Chabad's website. Meyer Amschel Rothschild took the visitors under his wing, so to speak. He showed them the old shul, synagogue, the big yeshiva, the orphan home, the hospital, and many other institutions. Deeply moved by all they heard from the young Jewish boy, the old man took out 3 golden coins from his pocket and handed the money to him. Thank you, said Meyer Amschel, accepting the coins. This time I shall keep the money, as I feel I have earned it, and put the coins in his pocket. The young prince stretched out his hand to the Jewish boy, saying, Meyer Amschel, if you would accept my religion, I would gladly appoint you to a high position in my government when I become ruler. That is out of the question, answered Meyer Amschel. I will never give up my faith for anything in the world, he concluded proudly. However, Meyer Amschel had meanwhile become ill. He still managed to fast on the last Yom Kippur of his life and stayed in shul the whole day. But on the following day, he felt too ill to get up out of bed, and on the first night of Sukkot, at the age of 68, Meyer Amschel Rothschild passed away. He died because of his religion. The Rothschilds are known for banking. Usury, that slavery, that comes from the Torah.
It says here, כאשר מקרא ברכך, כאשר ואהבת הגויים רבים, you'll lend to the goyim.
Okay, I don't know that word.
ואהבת הגויים רבים, ואתה לא תעבוד, and you won't borrow. You'll lend them the money. ומשלת בגויים רבים, you rule over the goyim, ובך לא ימשלו. Yeah.
Genesis 17:10. This is the covenant that you and your descendants must keep. Each male among you must be circumcised. Verse 11. You must cut off the flesh of your foreskin as a sign of the covenant between me and you. This is circumcision in the Torah, and it's actually mandatory for Jews in Israel. A woman was fined $140 for each day she refused to circumcise her son. So if you don't want a man sucking on your baby's penis, you will be fined until you agree to it. Mishnah Torah, Sefer Kedusha, Isserei Biyah, verse 1. When a Jew engages in relations with a woman from other nations, taking her as his wife, or a Jewess engages in relations with a non-Jew as his wife, they are punished by lashes. According to scriptural law, as Deuteronomy 7:3 states, you shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughter to his son, and do not take his daughter for your son. Verse 10. If, by contrast, a Jewish male enters into relations with a Gentile woman, when he does so intentionally, she should be executed. She is executed because she caused the Jew to be involved in an unseemly transgression, as is the law with regard to an animal. This applies regardless of whether the Gentile woman was a minor of 3 years of age. She is executed. Intermarriage isn't just outlawed in the Torah, it's also banned in Israel. The Israeli government also banned an Arab-Jewish love novel, claiming it threatens Jewish identity. A lot of people don't know about this because Jews run Hollywood, and they keep coming out with movies about how evil whites were, not allowing intermarriage and whatnot, doing all they can to keep this bogus white supremacy narrative alive, when in fact it is Jewish supremacy that is alive and well.
But you're the one who finds it impossible to accept both Zionism and democracy in the same state.
Anyone does, because Zionism, the very definition of it is the creation of a Jewish state. In fact, Israel is defined in its Declaration of Independence as the Jewish state.
In Israel, they even segregate maternity wards. Israeli lawmaker Bezalel Smotrich's wife was secretly recorded by Channel 10, and she said, "Whoever is not a Jew is problematic for me. The first moment when a child enters the world is a holy moment, pure, Jewish. I really wanted Jewish hands to be the first to touch my child." Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank, bulldozing Palestinian homes, and then building neighborhoods where only Jewish people can live. They are building Jewish-only roads on stolen land. They have separate schools for Jews and separate schools for Arabs, which do not receive anywhere near the same amount of funding. The few mixed schools that they have get firebombed by Jews. The 2 Israelis arrested spray-painted "There's no coexisting with cancer," "End assimilation," and "There's no such thing as coexistence." Jews have been kicked out of their host country all throughout history, and one of the reasons was because they never assimilated. This comes from Judaism.
Can we invite our non-Jewish friends and family to our house, or can we go to their house and celebrate Thanksgiving? The Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah says no. It says no. Not allowed. Doesn't matter whether it's Thanksgiving or it's a regular meal. Not allowed. Why? There's an issue of having these type of meals because chas v'shalom you get so comfortable that you marry their daughters or their sons. You're not supposed to have meals together. So can you have turkey? Enjoy 2 turkeys. Enjoy the turkey. Can you have the interfaith peace? Absolutely not.
A settler opened fire with an automatic rifle in a crowded mosque in the West Bank town of Hebron. At least 40 Palestinians were killed, scores more wounded.
The killer, an American-born Jew, Baruch Goldstein, was himself a part-time soldier, although he worked primarily as a doctor at a nearby Jewish settlement.
He was always there for anybody that was sick. Okay, he refused to treat Arabs.
Palestinian fury as the victims of the mosque massacre are rushed to hospital in Hebron. Just minutes earlier, these people had been praying, celebrating the Arab fast of Ramadan. They were mercilessly gunned down by an Israeli settler. Doctors say most were shot in the back as they knelt to pray.
What he did was something which is a loyal act of heroism on behalf of the Jewish people.
Do you consider Dr. Goldstein a martyr, a hero?
Yes. Yes.
You consider him a hero?
I most certainly do.
I was proud to know him, and I think he's one of the finest people I'd ever met.
Even after what he's done?
Even after.
There's no question about it, he was a great man. There's no question about it.
This was desperation for a man who was a moral man for every instant of his life.
They deserved, and they got what they deserved.
The most upsetting part of this whole thing isn't that the Arabs were killed. It was that Dr. Barak Goldstein was killed.
I wish I had the guts to do it too.
As night fell and they walked towards the cemetery, a woman shouted,
Baruch Tzaddik!
Baruch HaTzedek. It was spoken with a thick American accent, and it meant Baruch, the saint.
It is important for the Israelis to shift attention somewhere else and make the world forget what Goldstein did. Immediately after the Goldstein attack, the Israeli Secret Service clandestinely planted a bomb in a Catholic church in Lebanon, hoping to kill hundreds of Catholic worshippers, a bombing which would then be blamed on the Arabs, and in this way shift media focus onto the Arabs. Arab attacks and 50-year-old Holocaust tales from World War II are what the Israelis seek to keep constantly in the news any way they can.
What was also familiar was his political outlook. He was very critical of the peace process. His hero and good friend was the late Rabbi Meir Kahane.
Today, after the attack, Israeli militants hailed him as a hero, the son of Meir Kahane, calling him a Samson of his time.
Many Jews celebrate Samson, who was the original suicide bomber. And they celebrate Baruch Goldstein as well, knowing that he shot people in the back while they were praying. They celebrated his mass murder then, and are still doing so to this day. After Baruch Goldstein murdered 29 people and wounded over 100 others, Chabad Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg wrote his most infamous work, a pamphlet titled Baruch HaGiver, or Blessed is the Heroic Man, that investigates the spiritual and moral virtues of Goldstein's massacre. The title, perhaps not incidentally, also involved Goldstein's own name, suggesting that he was the heroic man. The life of Israel is more important than the life of Goyim, Ginsburg wrote there. If there is a chance, even a slight one, that the Goy will work, even indiscreetly, to harm the life of Israel, then you don't care for the life of the Goy. Moreover, the best Goy is a dead one. The Hebrew version of the Talmud states that the best of Gentiles should be killed. This is confirmed by the Jewish Virtual Library. For over 20 years, Ginsburg's schools have been financed by the Israeli government to the tune of over 1 million shekels. Published financial records show he was receiving hundreds of thousands of shekels a year. Baruch Goldstein actually visited Rabbi Dov Lior for instruction. After he massacred dozens of people, the rabbi ruled that Goldstein was holier than all the martyrs of the Holocaust. It doesn't stop there. Menachem Livni, who was convicted of murders, headed a terror organization dubbed the Jewish Underground. He testified that the spirit behind the Underground was Lior, and not just for his preaching and religious rulings regarding the need to murder Arabs or killing innocent people. Lior, according to the testimony of the murderer, was involved in the details and decided how and when they would act. Lior pressured the hesitant perpetrators to blow up 6 buses with all their passengers. The buses were loaded with explosives with the object of killing hundreds. Only the delay enabled the Shin Bet security service to arrest them at the last minute. The order came down. Lior was not to be arrested, tried, or even seriously interrogated. He was also being financed by the Israeli government, receiving tens of thousands of shekels every month. His job was to combine Torah studies with military service. Lior has also said that Jewish law permits the destruction of Gaza, take crushing deterring steps to exterminate the enemy. Samuel 15:18. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are exterminated. In the Torah, there is a group of people called Amalek who have to be genocided. Problem is, you have rabbis labeling the Palestinians Amalek, and even going far as calling for Palestinians to be put in death camps.
ברמב"ם כתוב שאיך יודעים מי המשיח? אם הוא יהיה מלך
והוא יכבוש את כל ארץ ישראל. יקים את בית המקדש ויחריט את זרעו של עמלק. זה שלושת המרכיבים.
For their Messiah to arrive, they need to conquer the land of Israel, which is Palestine, rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and genocide their enemies, which is clearly what they are trying to do.
Here with 150,000 lunatics in the Jewish settlements. Those are not ordinary Jews. Those people are there looking at us as Palestinians as subhumans. They think that God is directing them to kill us, and their aim is open. They hate us, they're racist, and they're lunatics, and they are protected by the army.
100,000 lunatics?
100,000 people who believe that Palestinians must be driven out.
Israeli lawmaker Moshe Feiglin openly called for ethnic cleansing, calling for civilians to be put in concentration camps. He said Gazans should be given generous incentives to relocate after all fighters and their supporters killed. No two states for two people. There was only one state for one nation. Chabad Rabbi Manis Friedman was asked, how should Jews treat their Arab neighbors? He said, destroy their holy sites, kill men, women, children, and cattle. He justified his statements by bringing up the Old Testament.
There is such a concept in Jewish law as any population, and under very, very specific circumstances, according to various rabbinic opinions, it would be seemingly permissible to kill children.
אין הודנה, מורידים אותם על הברכיים ונותנים להם בעיטה באחוריים. מוחקים את עזה! מוחקים את עזה! מוחקים את עזה! מה זה 200 גיחות רק 15 הרוגים? אנחנו רוצים 15 גיחות עם 2,000 הרוגים!
You have rabbis, the Israeli government, and their military saying there is no such thing as innocent civilians. Thou shalt not murder applies only to a Jew killing another Jew. Rabbis Yitzhak Shapira and Yosef Elitzer admit this in King's Torah. Shabtai Shavit, former head of the Mossad, said that they contemplated killing Mordecai Benunu, an Israeli nuclear technician who released details about Israel's nuclear reactor in Dimona. They didn't kill him because Jews don't do that to other Jews. Whereas it's okay to kill non-Jewish babies. Yitzhak Shapir said he has no regrets for writing King's Torah, adding that killing of enemies' children is permissible in order to defeat an evil king or tyrant. Jews were taken to Palestine as refugees. Then they decide to view the inhabitants of that land as an evil king that has to be eliminated. This is what the settlers believe. An infant and his parents were burned to death by settlers. Afterwards, they graffitied "Long live the Messiah." Meyer Ettinger, who was involved in the attack, spent only 10 months in detention, not a single day in prison. Former head of the Mossad, Shabtai Shavit, and the former head of Shin Bet, Carmel Yilan, admit that Israel chooses to ignore hate crimes done by Jews. Jewish Encyclopedia, Gentiles. The Mishnah, bearing such facts in mind, therefore declares that if a Gentile sue an Israelite, the verdict is for the defendant. If the Israelite is the plaintiff, he obtains full damages. The infant was only 18 months old, and Jewish supremacists celebrated the murder. Then Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman called for disloyal Israeli Arabs to be beheaded. Can you imagine if someone said Jews who are disloyal to the United States should be executed? Bibi specifically asked Lieberman to be the new defense minister, and he accepted. He said what he said, then was promoted to a position to kill people. Then Economy Minister Naftali Bennett said, "I've killed lots of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that." He went on to become the education minister. Israeli professor Nurit Pled Elhanan actually wrote a book about how racist Israel's education system is. The kids are taught to kill Arabs and to hate Europeans.
מה דמיינת?
שאני הורגת אנשים ערבים.
אני מדמיין שכל פעם אני רואה מולי ערבי מת, זה ממש שמח אותי כבר יותר. באת לטנק, יורה בכולם, טק 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 טק, הורגת את כולם? איך הרגש?
הרגשתי מאושרת.
וכמה אנשים אתה חושב שאתה תצליח להרוג שתהיה חייל?
85.
ואתה רוצה להיות בצבא שתהיה גדול? לא רוצה להיות. למה אתה לא רוצה להיות?
ותנסו באמת להבין את הקשר בין אז להיום. זאת אומרת, האנטישמיות זה דבר שלא נגמר. בעקבות השואה קמה מדינת ישראל, אבל האנטישמיות זה משהו שיש עד היום, וכל הזמן תקראו עיתונים, יש מקרים אנטישמיים לכל רחבי אירופה ובארצות נוספות. כך שאתם כיהודים, כדור העתיד, ככאלה שעומדים להתגייס לצבא, צריכים לפגוש גם את הצד הזה שלנו. מלבד זה יוצא איתכם גם מאבטחים, יוצאים איתכם מאבטחים. המאבטחים לא יאפשרו לכם ליצור שום קשר עם האוכלוסייה המקומית. תפגשו שם אנשים שלא אוהבים אותנו. תראו, לא אוהבים אותנו, תחשבו שאתם, סלי. גם היום, אני אומרת לכם שוב, גם היום לא אוהבים אותנו שם.
זה כאילו האיכות שלנו, שאתה יודע שאף אחד לא סובל אותך, אבל אתה גאה בזה.
כאילו מגדלים אותנו מגיל קטן על זה שאנחנו נדע שיש לנו שונאים. לא יודעת, על כל מיני דברים כאלה. ובעצם כשהילד יודע שיש לו שונאים, כאילו מה שקרה בשואה לדורות הקודמים שלו, אז זה גורם לך איזה סוג של כעס לצד השני, כאב, כעס, אפילו שנאה.
Rabbi Dov Lior said that the Paris attacks are punishment for the Holocaust. The wicked ones in blood-soaked Europe deserve it for past treatment of Jews. At Auschwitz, Bibi said the same thing, adding, "Remember what Amalek did to you." Bibi is labeling the Germans Amalek, and now the Germans have to be genocided. Why do you think Germany is getting flooded with migrants? Every year, Israelis protest outside the German embassy on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and they said, "We are commanded in the Bible to remember what the evil Amalek did to you." That means to genocide. Rabbi Baruch Efrati said that the Islamization of Europe is a good thing. Jews should rejoice at the fact that Europe is paying for what it did to us for hundreds of years by losing its identity. If you've listened to Jews, they often say never forgive, never forget. Europeans pogromed and kicked Jews out of their countries repeatedly throughout history. The Jews hate Europeans far more than they hate Muslims. This orchestrated migrant crisis is motivated by revenge. Israeli lawmaker Mikhail Ben-Ari ripped up a New Testament that was given to him by a Christian organization. Yet Christian evangelicals donate tens of millions of dollars a year to Israel. These people are retarded.
There are two great allies for Jewish Israelis. There are two great allies for the Israeli state. They are Christians and they are conservatives. And I think that it would be becoming of Israelis to understand that we're here. We stand shoulder to shoulder with you. We love your country. We love your freedoms. We love your culture. We love your history. And we want to stand with you in defending all those beautiful things.
There are a lot of Jews who will infiltrate right-wing movements and talk about white genocide, then say that Israel is not behind it and that you should support Israel. When you bring up Jewish involvement, they'll say, oh, well, they're just leftist Jews. Well, rabbis write letters to Trump urging him to bomb Syria. Rabbis write letters to Trump urging him to accept refugees. Meanwhile, in Israel, they call for Jews not to rent apartments to non-Jews. they're not doing this because they're leftists. They're doing this because they're psychopaths. Bibi explained why Israel is not taking any refugees from the wars they created. He said, "We are determined to turn Israel into a world power, and not only to defend ourselves, but also to be a light unto the Gentile nations."
The miracle of Hanukkah is the miracle of Israel. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have endured unthinkable persecution and oppression, but no force has ever crushed your spirit, and no evil has ever extinguished your faith. And that is why the Jewish people shine as a light to all nations. Hanukkah is a time for Jewish families around the world to celebrate the miracles of the past and promises of the future. On behalf of all Americans, I also want to say how grateful I am for Jewish congregations throughout our country. You cherish your families, support your communities, and uplift our beloved country. Today, our nation is stronger, and our world is more full of promise because of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and the faith that burns so brightly in your hearts. May you all have a truly blessed and happy Hanukkah. God bless you, and God bless America.
Jewish supremacist Shalom Rubashkin systematically defrauded a bank for $35 million in loans and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. He was a member of Chabad Lubavitch, and they started a campaign for his release. Next thing you know, Trump commutes his sentence, despite the fact that he employed hundreds of illegal immigrants. 76% of the 968 agri-processors' employees were found to be using false or fraudulent social security numbers that were allegedly supplied by plant management. Agri-processors also pled guilty to 83 counts of child labor violations. In kosher slaughter, you see how they treat cattle, and it's very similar to how they treat Gentiles in occupied Palestine. Rubashkin was enforcing slave labor. This is what they want for us when their Messiah arrives. That's not all. Feds even found a meth lab at the kosher plant. Rubashkin's son-in-law was a pedophile who pled guilty to sexually assaulting 2 boys. But you have nothing to worry about. Just like David Duke said, Trump is playing 3D chess.
And Hashem wrote in the Torah like this, הן גויים כמר מדלי, וכשחק מאזניים נחשבו. Translation, the difference between a Jew to a goy, to a non-Jew, and we are talking now even the most righteous goy, not an idol worshipper, a great Gentile person, great personality, loving Jew, respecting God, everything fine with him. But this is a Jew compared to him, according to the book of God. The Jew is like the water that you bring from the lake in the bucket. And the Gentile is the few drops that stick to the side of the bucket when you put it down. This is the comparison of God between the Jew to a non-Jew. And again, I'm not making it up. I'm giving you the source. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 15. Go and check. In any language you want, it's the same meaning.
Based Jewish supremacist Dennis Prager writes articles saying, yes, Jews are the chosen people. Deuteronomy 7:6. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the people on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. This is in the Torah.
A month ago, it was discovered that 70% of the Israelis believe that they belong to a chosen people.
70% of Israeli Jews believe that they are God's chosen people. 70%. The Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, wrote in Hatanya, chapter 49, 2 contrary types of souls exist. A non-Jewish soul comes from 3 satanic spheres, while the Jewish soul stems from holiness. As has been explained, an embryo is called a human being because it has both body and soul. Thus, the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish embryo can be understood. Source: Jewish Fundamentalism in Israel by Professor Israel Shah. Bibi has also quoted the Rebbe at the UN. Rabbi Yitzhak Shapira explains the distinction between Jewish and Gentile blood. There is reason to kill babies on the enemy side, even if they have not transgressed the 7 Noahide laws. Because of the future danger they may present, since it is assumed that they will grow up to be evil like their parents. So they just assume all Gentiles are evil in nature.
Gentiles will kill you. Gentiles will kill you.
Back to Chabad Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. In 1989, 30 of Ginsburg's students went on a rampage in the village of Kifl Herez, near Nablus, shooting and killing a 13-year-old Palestinian girl. Ginsburg testified on their behalf in an Israeli court, saying, "It should be recognized that Jewish blood and a Goy's blood are not the same." At Baruch Goldstein's funeral, Rabbi Yaakov Perin said that 1 million Arabs are not worth a Jewish fingernail. Rabbi Eli Ben-Dahan said about Palestinians, "To me, they are like animals. They aren't human." Bibi promoted him to Deputy Defense Minister, a position to kill people. After Alor Azaria was filmed executing a Palestinian who was already down, Ben-Dahan proposed a bill that would extend the immunity privilege granted to IDF soldiers for actions committed during military operations. Basically, a license to kill. Alor Azaria actually criticized Bibi in 2014 for considering a ceasefire with Hamas. He wrote on Facebook, "Kill them all," and Rabbi Meir Kahana was right. His mother added, "Death to those who harm Jews. Enough with the humanism. If needed, kill women and children." What this Jewish supremacist family doesn't understand is that they are illegally occupying the Palestinians' land. Alor executed the man in Palestinian territory and also admitted that he wants to kill them all. The hierarchy of the human species as told by Eli Ben-Dahan. A Jew always has a much higher soul than a Goy, even if he is a homosexual. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook wrote in Arat Yisrael, "The difference between the Jewish soul and the soul of all the Gentiles is greater than the difference between the soul of a man and the soul of an animal." Rabbi Stephen Przansky, "There is a war for the land of Israel that is being waged, and the Arabs who dwell in the land of Israel are the enemy in that war and must be vanquished." At a certain point, the unrestrained behavior of unruly animals becomes the fault of the zookeeper, not the animals. He's a rabbi living in America. He's not even an Israeli politician. He also wants a third temple to be built and suggests moving the Al-Aqsa Mosque to Israel's best friends in Saudi Arabia. Meir Turgeman, the mayor of Jerusalem, where the US embassy is being moved, also called the Palestinians animals. "We lived in false hope that if we would help them, they would change their animal behavior." Ayelet Shaked, while serving as an Israeli lawmaker, she called for the genocide of Palestinians and was promoted to Justice Minister by Bibi. She wrote on Facebook, "They are all enemy combatants, and their blood shall be on all their heads." Now this includes the mothers of the martyrs, who send them to hell with flowers and kisses. They should follow their sons. Nothing would be more just. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raise the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. She is highly popular with Orthodox Jews. Jewish Encyclopedia, Gentiles. "The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed. The best of snakes ought to have its head crushed." Former Chief Sephardic Rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef. "How can you make peace with a snake? Those evildoers, the Arabs, it says in the Gemara that God is sorry he ever created those sons of Ishmael." Back to the Jewish Encyclopedia. They held that only Israelites are men. Quoting the prophet, "Ye my flock, the flock of my pastor, are men." Gentiles they classed not as men, but as barbarians. Rabbi Stuart Weiss writes in the Jerusalem Post that Palestinians are subhuman creatures. Yitzhak Shamir, while Prime Minister, said, "We say to them from the heights of this mountain and from the perspective of thousands of years of history that they are like grasshoppers compared to us." Shamir was a member of a Jewish terrorist group called the Stern Gang. They assassinated Count Folke Bernadotte, a member of the Swedish royal family serving as the UN Security Council mediator in Palestine. They also assassinated Lord Moyne, the British Minister of State in the Middle East.
So you're racist? Of course not. Of course not. But there is a basic difference between Jews and non-Jews. We are God's chosen people. And if the Jewish leaders don't like that, then they can burn their local Bibles, but don't burn Kahana.
Thanks to their friends in the Western media, the Israelis were able to put a propaganda cloak over these massacres to disguise the racist contempt the Jews felt toward non-Jewish Arabs. This veil of alibis and illusion began to be penetrated, however, with the rise in the Israeli state of a New York rabbi from Brooklyn, Meir Kahane. Kahane was the embodiment of all that the Talmud teaches. He was vicious, sadistic, and racist, characteristics he shared with all Israeli government leaders. But Kahane differed from them in one key respect. He was honest and forthright about what Judaism actually stood for. He openly admitted that it was the Talmud, Judaism's holiest book, that gave the Israelis the right to murder, to hate, and to subdue. Finally, the mask was off, and Judaism could be seen for what it truly is.
Kahane called the man a dirty Arab. Kahane often refers to Arabs as dogs.
I want to make it clear to those dogs that are standing there, there is no such thing as an Arab village in the state of Israel.
Remember Meyer Ettinger, who burned alive the 18-month-old child? Well, he's actually Meir Kahane's grandson and is a prize student of Yitzhak Ginsburg. Ginsburg told the New York Jewish Week that halakha, or traditional Jewish law, would probably permit seizing an unwilling non-Jew for a liver transplant to save the life of a Jew. Jewish life has infinite value, he told the newspaper. There is something infinitely more holy and unique about Jewish life than non-Jewish life. New York Times finds disproportionate role of Israelis in world organ trafficking. IDF Chief Rabbi Eyal Karim, before he was promoted, said that Jewish law permits raping Gentile women as a way to keep up morale. He then gets promoted to a position telling the military how they should conduct themselves. Despite the revelations, Israeli Chief of Staff was never in any doubt that Rabbi Karim was the right appointment. Talmud, Evamoth 60b. It was taught, Rabbi Simeon ben Yohai stated, a proselyte who is under the age of 3 years and 1 day is permitted to marry a priest. Ketubath 11b. When a grown man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing. For when the girl is less than this, it is as if one put the finger into the eye. Bibi said that the basis for Israeli law should be the Talmud. Just imagine living in a world where rabbis can do whatever they want. They directly rule over the Palestinians, and once that temple is built, they'll directly rule over us. Israeli journalist Israel Shamir wrote in his book Part A, Palestine is not the ultimate goal of the Jews. The world is. They are obsessed with ideas about race. In their speeches and writings, they spread beliefs in racial purity and in the superiority of God's chosen people, what you can call the master race. They pronounce that this race must remain pure in order to one day take over the world.
There's a larger imperative. We know this. We've seen this before. There's a master race, now there's a master faith. And that allows you to do anything to anyone.
Look, it's well known that the Jewish people, whether in countries and times of hideous oppression and cruelty, or whether in blessed places like the United States of America, where Jews have lived in tranquility and prosperity greater than anywhere else in the last 2,000 years, it doesn't matter. Jews have always been disproportionately good with money. It's not an accident. And it isn't because they eat chicken soup, and it isn't because they're circumcised, and it's not because they're smart. None of these things are true explanations. The true explanation is very simple, and that is that embedded in the brilliance of the Bible are countless strategies, steps, countless spiritual maneuvers. I really do think that this is the foundational principle. Look, there are a lot of you who are not prospering because you feel that making money is taking money. A lot of you are not earning your God-ordained wealth because deep down you feel that it is somewhat unseemly, that it's inappropriate. Because if you are acquiring money, there must be somebody else who is losing money. This is critical. If you believe that, you are doomed.
אז כן, מה כתוב? זה מה שאני לא מבין.
כתוב שאתם קרויים אדם, והגויים לא קרויים אדם, זה מה שכתוב.
לא קרויים?
לא קרויים אדם, לא קוראים להם אדם.
אוקיי, אז מה קוראים להם?
אדם זה אדם אל העליון. אדם הוא בן אדם שהוא שונה מהבהמה.
Only an animal can be said to have enough. And that's why it is. We should be satisfied with our lot. There's no question about it. You shouldn't walk around with a constant unhappiness and a constant dissatisfaction. That's different. But you see, if you say how much food does an animal need, almost any farmer will tell you exactly how much food a cow needs. And that's what he gives the cow. And you don't see a lot of overweight cows around. You don't see a lot of overweight lions around. With animals, it is different from human beings because we human beings are touched by God. God created us in His image, which means there's a little part of us that is infinite and limitless.
אדם,
שנייה,
אדם זה על שם אדם אל העליון. אדם זה כביכול אדם אל אלוקי. אוקיי? זה פירוש אדם. אדם זה אדם אל העליון, וכיוון שאנחנו בנים של אלוקים, אז הוא קרא לנו בני אדם. עכשיו, הגויים מה שאין, כן? אלוקים עשה אותם בשביל שיעשו פה...
בשביל לשרת את היהודים. כל הגויים שאתה רואה שיש בעולם, המיליארדים האלה, הם הכל רק בשביל שהיהודים יהיה להם איזה תועלת.
עכשיו,
אנחנו לא רואים את זה, אנחנו לא יודעים בדיוק.
כן, היות ואנחנו בגלות, אז אוטומטי עדיין הם עוד לא משרתים אותנו לגמרי, רק חלקית.
כל אחד יהיה לו, כשמשיח יבוא, אז כל אחד יהיה לו אלפים עבדים, 2,800 עבדים.
בינתיים, המשיח לא כאן, אז איך הם משרתים אותנו? הם בונים לנו רכבים, דירות, בניינים. למי הם בונים את זה? לנו. משרתים את היהודים.
It's not just Trump that is connected to Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad Rabbi Ber Lazar is the chief rabbi of Russia. He is very close to President Vladimir Putin. The Jewish oligarchs at Putin's side are also the main financiers of Chabad Lubavitch. Jews control the wealth of Russia, and Chabad is a dominant force. They're not going anywhere. If this offends you, know that there are Russians who agree with me. Chabad can say whatever they want about Gentiles. Meanwhile, Putin is making it illegal to criticize them. A taxi driver in Russia was sentenced to 350 hours of community service for writing online that Jews dominate Russia and the world. Imagine what would happen if we were in Russia. Putin passed a law sentencing Holocaust deniers to 5 years in prison. Russia is virtually free of anti-Semitism. Putin is calling for Jews to emigrate to Russia. Jews destroy your country. Why would Putin be welcoming them into Russia? That's because they're not a threat. They've already destroyed Russia with Marxism and took it over 100 years ago. It's the West which they are currently destroying with cultural Marxism so that they can take it over. As Putin's Rabbi Beryl Lazar puts it, the West lacks mutual respect, unlike Russia. Putin was Israel's Person of the Year in 2015, despite working with Syria and Iran. Reuven Rivlin, the president of Israel, says that Putin is loyal to Israel's security. If you read the comments on RT's videos, you might actually believe that Putin is against Israel. But Putin's rabbi Beryl Lazar says that ties with Israel have never been closer. Israel has a simple message. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. We don't rely only on America. Putin is arming the Arab and Muslim states and working with Israel exactly as the Soviet Union was doing. He's profiteering from the war in Syria. He's not there because he wants to defend Christianity. That's literally KGB propaganda. Putin supported Israel during their 2014 bombing campaign of Gaza. Chief Sephardic Rabbi of Israel, Yitzhak Yosef, said to Putin, "According to the Jewish tradition, your leadership is decided by the kingdom of God, King of the world, and therefore we bless you. Blessed is the one who gave of his glory to flesh and blood." The Sanhedrin contacted Breaking Israel News to announce that the election of Trump, who has promised to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, coupled with Putin's expressed desire for the temple to be rebuilt, prompted the Jewish court to send a letter offering the two the opportunity to act as modern-day Cyrus figures, non-Jewish kings who recognize the importance of Israel and the temple. An Israeli bystander called out in Russian, "Welcome, President Putin." Putin approached the man who explained the importance of the Temple Mount and the Jewish temple. Shadrei Sharadim, an Orthodox Hebrew news site, reported that Putin responded, "That's exactly the reason I came here, to pray for the temple to be built again." Putin's on our side, says Beryl Lazar. Chabad Lubavitch, who is pushing to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, wields tremendous influence in both Russia and Israel. When Ben-Gurion announced plans to rule the world from Jerusalem, calling for a world alliance and no more wars, that always included Russia. Some people will say, "Oh, but the Jewish media is against Russia." That media isn't pushing Israelis to go to war with Russia. It's pushing Americans to fight a war that they are not going to win. As you've heard earlier, the rabbis want a large war. When the dust settles, Putin will be fine, whereas the United States will be bled dry just like Germany after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Israel will take its place as the new superpower. There's so much more to this. We'll get into it in part 2 in the future.
We have a global parasite plaguing our planet, led by a New Age form of Judaism, ran by people that have nothing to do with Hebrew Israelites of the Old Testament. People of humanity need to rise up together, crush this Jewish usury banking, end their way to fund wars and control nations, return media and education to public utility. If Trump wants America first, he needs to focus on the needs of Americans, not a foreign country. Quit fighting Israel's battles. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you'll take the time to share this with everybody. It's about the message. And actually, we need to stand up and do something about this. It's getting to the time where it's too late. So we need to join together, and that's all forms of humanity. We're all in peril. So anyway, with that, thanks for watching. We'll be talking more about it. Marto out.